Watch your notebook. There's more.
Welcome to CN Live, Season 7, Episode 1, Is the West Dead? I'm Joe Lauria, the Editor-in-Chief of Consortium News.
And I'm Elizabeth Voss.
A rapid series of events over just the past few days has some political analysts saying the 80-year U.S.-dominated Western consensus is crumbling under the force of a radical break by the new Trump administration with the decades-old Atlantic consensus after just 3 weeks in office. A phone call between the U.S. and Russian presidents, a remark by Trump to cut military spending by half, an address at NATO headquarters by the new U.S. Secretary of Defense, a provocative speech by the U.S. Vice President at the Munich Security Conference, the beginning of U.S.-Russia peace talks without Ukraine or Europe, and U.S.-Russian discussions on lifting sanctions, all in the last few days, has left the Western world spinning. Is the post-war alliance really doomed? Is the West dead? Our guests today to discuss this are Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector, U.S. Marines counterintelligence officer, commentator with great expertise on these issues. Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst who worked, of course, on the Soviet desk, was there for the signing of a major nuke arms reduction deal in Moscow. And Patrick Lawrence, former editor at the International Herald Tribune, a columnist and contributor to Consortium News. Thank you, all of you, for being here. So just to recap, there were six major developments which took place in just the last 5 days. Now, I began this year at 50 years ago in professional journalism, and I cannot remember one period ever in which so many significant major events took place in so short a time. And we're only talking about Russia-Ukraine here. Essentially, we're not talking about Gaza or the cutting down of U.S. agencies, waste and fraud, etc. So many things have happened in these 3 weeks. We're only going to talk today about these.
Recording in progress.
Today, we're going to talk about Russia only, I said. So this is really a shock and awe by the Trump administration to upend the status quo, which so many vested interests grew comfortable, including in Europe, which reacted ferociously to these developments, and also, of course, the Ukrainians. So let's instead of going through all of the 5 or 6 developments that I've mentioned, let's start with an overview. I want to start with you, Scott. How do you describe the changes that we have witnessed in the last 5 days? Is this 80-year U.S. dominated Atlantic alliance really ending? What happens to NATO? Give me your overall reaction. What does this mean now that you've had a little bit of time to digest what's gone on?
Well, I mean, there's a couple words I would use to describe what's happened here. One is reality. What we've seen is a massive reality check. The other term is inevitability. I don't think there's an observer. I don't think anybody in this audience, this panel, thought that what was happening with the United States, the aggressive posture that we've taken, especially in the post-Cold War era, was sustainable. I know for a fact, I've spoken to every one of you, and you have all said that the route that America was down, this sustainment of a rules-based international order at the expense of everything else, was going to be the ruination of America. And so I don't say, is this alliance dead? It was dead already. It's been dead for decades. It's been a zombie. It's been a walking corpse. No, there's the potential now for a genuine American-European relationship that can bring us both to life. If you say that what's killing the relationship is that Europe has become addicted to war, then that's not a Europe that's worth sustaining. And yet, when we take a look at the response to what the Trump administration has put forward in this most recent European sojourn with Hegseth and J.D. Vance and others, um, it's Europe that appears to be addicted to war. They don't know anything else other than war. Now, I'm going to say that that's not Europe, that is a slice of political and economic elites that have been empowered by an America that no longer exists, by an America that was seeking to sustain, as the Biden administration articulated repeatedly in their national security strategy, sustain the rules-based international order. Read the document again that Biden put out. The singular thing that made America, define America's national security interests was the rules-based international order. That is dead. Donald Trump has killed it. It's finished. It's done, never to reemerge. And with it goes all the baggage. I think you're going to see, even in the coming weeks, Joe, the death of NATO and the death of the European Union. And these are two institutions that couldn't die soon enough. But it doesn't mean the end of Europe. See, I believe that underneath this veneer of militarism is the real Europe. What I see is that there's a layer of political and economic elites that have become addicted to being the servants of America, that have allowed America to call the shots, that have sold their soul to the devil that was the rules-based international order, and are shocked now that the wicked witch is dead. They don't realize Dorothy threw the water on the witch. The witch is no longer here, and they don't know what to do. They will disappear. There's no ability to sustain this. They lack the means to do this. They lack the political will. We're seeing the fracturing as it happens. Joe, this is the most magnificent week in modern history. This is one of the most, I've been calling for exactly this. I've been called everything you want, every bad name in the world. But for a long time, I've been saying this is exactly what has to happen. It doesn't mean we're selling out to Russia. It means we are finally standing up and saying that we are not a nation defined by war, that we are a nation defined by relationships, that we are a nation that knows how to engage in economic discourse. I'm not saying Donald Trump is the perfect ambassador, but when you have a revolution, you don't get to pick the revolutionary. The revolutionary picks the revolution. And Donald Trump is the revolutionary of our times. And what's taking place today is a revolution in every sense of the word. And I just think it's just remarkable. I couldn't be happier. And I will tell you this, the Russians are in shock. I'll let Ray maybe talk about that or something, but the Russians are in shock because I kept telling them this is going to happen. This is the direction. This is the real America. Underneath the Biden crap, the Obama crap, the military industrial complex, there's a real America there that doesn't yearn for war, a real America that yearns for peace and will figure out how to interact with the world in a way that doesn't promote conflict. It's there. It just needs to find somebody willing to break through this crust of corruption. Holy cow, this isn't breaking through the corruption. This is scraping it off with a K-bar. I mean, this is the most awesome week ever. Now, I hope it can be sustainable. Sometimes things can't be. We'll find out if Trump is everything he says he is. The proof is in the pudding. But you know what? Journeys don't begin until somebody takes that first step. This is one hell of a first step.
Of course, the U.S. may still be addicted to war with Israel, but that's a whole other issue. I guess we could take what we can get right now, and this is. So you weren't shocked, Scott, as the Russians.
No,
You were not shocked.
this was going to happen. This was exactly what. This is why I voted for Trump. I didn't vote for Trump for all the MAGA crap and I voted for Trump because it was the only path to make America safe. It was the only path to survival. I put a meme.
Yeah, but we weren't sure he was going to actually do it until this week.
Well, it was no, but it was the only hope. That's what I said. Do you remember I did a meme where I made fun of the Avengers movie Endgame and all that, where Iron Man snapped his finger to save the world, 1 in 60 million chance of. So I said the only reason why I voted for Donald Trump is there was a 1 in 60 million chance that he was going to follow through.
Yeah.
If you voted for anybody else, there was no chance they were going to follow through.
Well,
My God, this man has snapped his finger and things have happened, and it's great.
Maybe it's time to buy a lottery ticket. Ray McGovern, can you follow up on that? Your overall view of these last 5 days. Do you concur with what Scott's saying it's the most important week in modern history, or most recently anyway?
Well, I do. Yeah, I agree with Scott. And, I would point out that one reason Trump won the election, by all evidence, is that he appeared as the anti-war candidate, for God's sake. And the reason that the Democrats didn't realize that really speaks ill of the Democrats. Now, is the West dead? Well, sort of, but it's nobody killed the West. The Russians, the Chinese, Ukrainians, nobody killed the West. It's suicide. It's death by suicide. Okay. Now, they embarked on all these crazy policies. And Lavrov and Marco Rubio talked just yesterday. And the readout from that is quite remarkable because it recognizes that when Obama did all those things to start America down this path of denigrating Russia, throwing out their diplomats, taking over their consular property, and putting this story out about the Russians being responsible for Hillary Clinton's defeat, well, that's going to all be repaired now. They're going back to decent diplomatic relations, periodic consultations between Lavrov and Marco Rubio, and they're going to repair all this with respect to diplomatic preferences as well. Man, that's one that's just tailed on for the last week, the last day actually. So what am I saying? I'm saying that the Cold War is over, that America and Western Europe, all of Europe now, will have to say, well, now the Russians are a real threat to us. And I think it'll become clear within the next couple of months that no, there was a synthetic drumming up of the Russian threat. And that there was one very, very important constituent that was profiting from all this, I would say profiteering from all this, and that is all those German companies, all those French, all those American companies that are building weapons and really, really furnishing Ukraine with everything they needed for as long as they needed until now. Now they're not going to do it anymore. So, it's a miserable performance. You don't leave at least I don't leave my friends in the lurch like that. But, these people are just happy to be led down the garden path, okay? These hacks, these political hacks that have been reigning in Europe, they kind of deserve it. They should have known better. And so, yeah, that kind of West is dead. What I see is the kind of hope to which I think Scott was referring, the kind of hope that existed in 1990 when I was so happy that the Soviet Union fell apart. I clapped myself in the back here and said, way to go, Ray. Mission accomplished. That's what I did for 30 years, okay? Not just me, it was others, okay? I thought I could retire, go work in the inner city, which I wanted to do, and not worry about this anymore. Now, I was wrong, okay? I was wrong for obvious reasons. But, that was the change that I hoped for. So what's the history lesson here? That benign change can be reversed. That one was reversed, and it was the same military industrial complex helped by Wall Street and the bankers that reversed it. And Russia was thrown for a loop for a whole decade. Now they're back. Now, my view of the Russians is they don't want to take over Poland or the Baltic states or even the rest of Ukraine. These things can be worked out. And the Europeans are left high and dry. They're going to have to deal with it. So let them deal with it. I was asked yesterday on this German program, what can we do? What is ours to do here in Germany? And I said, sei doch vernünftig. Be reasonable here, The only thing you need to do is act like Erwachsene, grown-ups, okay? And I think I heard a lot of applause at that, because these are anti-war people that were there in Munich, actually. I lived there for 5 years. So there's great hope. I just hope it won't be dashed like it was in 1990 to 1999.
The so-called peace dividend. Patrick Lawrence, can you weigh in on your overall view of these developments over the last few days?
Yeah, I think I take a somewhat more muted view of what we're talking about. We have certainly, it looks to me as if Trump did a very great deal of thinking during his 4 years in the political wilderness, and has come back with exceedingly ambitious plans to get things done this time around that he was prevented from getting done last time, right? But I think we have to be careful to recognize there is almost certainly some distance between Trump's aspirations and what can actually be done. We're talking about extremely formidable institutions. Scott named two, NATO and the EU. It will take a very great deal of effort before these organizations disappear, if indeed they do so in the lifetime of anybody on this program. I wouldn't be waiting for it in the next couple of months. Okay, so Trump, I think it was a very, very big deal when Trump picked up the phone and spoke to Vladimir Putin. I don't know who placed the call, but this was announced last Wednesday. The call took place sometime prior to Trump's announcement Wednesday afternoon, your time, Joe. Whatever comes, and he immediately announced that this marks the beginning of negotiations for an end to the Ukraine conflict. That's big, right? But you ought to read his remarks posted on Truth Social and X. He didn't get to the Ukraine negotiations until after he elaborated on all sorts of different things. They talked about AI and energy supplies and the dollar and so on, right? These things are kind of taken typically as the bric-a-brac of diplomatic encounters between major powers, right? But I took them somewhat more seriously because Trump made it clear, not only does this mark the beginning of negotiations to end the war in Ukraine, but I am talking about a full restoration of relations with the Russian Federation. And I was especially delighted to note that he finally began repairing the disgraceful injustice American leaders, Biden, John Kerry, and so on, are erasing Russia from the history of the Second World War. We joined together to defeat the Reich, right? That sort of thing. I think he's talking about a relationship that really does have some promise by way of restoration. Okay. Now, the implications here are very many. And I think what may happen to the Ukrainians is also very, very realistic to expect that they're going to be in for a very major change, and will have to accept a settlement that the Biden people, Blinken especially, flatly refuse to consider. And the third thing I think we need to look at is what will happen to the Western alliance. There have been many comments to the effect that, well, Hegseth in Brussels and later in Warsaw announced, we are not behind NATO membership for Ukraine. There is no question of what were his other conditions. There's no NATO membership.
Not going back to the 2014 borders.
Yes, that's right. Those are, what did he call them? Illusory goals, right? That's good. All he's doing is speaking, to take Scott's word, infusing some reality into a situation that became completely ridiculous, right? So, and the talks that are about to begin in Saudi Arabia, Zelensky will not be there. Good, So there's no more pretend. Zelensky was the leader of a sovereign country. No, he was taking orders all this time. Good enough that pretense is gone, right?
But Patrick,
but
are you expressing skepticism about? Are you expressing skepticism about this happening? About what Scott and Ray were saying, basically.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of let me go at it this way. Good question. I want to be very careful here. There are comments around, you sent me one or two, to the effect that the Vance speech in Munich is comparable to Putin's very notable speech in 2007, challenging American unipolarity in the post-Cold War period, right? Comparable in that it announced the beginning of the end of the Western alliance. I have to pause with that. If you read the speech, Vance is challenging. Vance mounted an attack on the practices of neoliberal elites. We are familiar with them. And indeed, Vance, I think one reason he made that speech is because he's very familiar with them himself here at home. Censorship, the disinformation industry, manipulating elections, and so on and so forth, ignoring the wishes of voters and all that, right? Now,
I want to get into that. But sorry to interrupt you, Patrick, but we're talking about the totality of events here, not just Vance's speech in terms of the monumental shaking. And he did say that the enemy is not Russia, but it's within. And then he enumerated those things: the censorship, the not listening to the voice of the people, etc.
Let me give you my punchline, and we can move on. Okay, I don't think Vance was declaring anything like the end of the Western alliance. People who characterize his speech that way are equating the Western alliance with the neoliberal order. I'm not on for that, okay? We have to think more clearly about exactly what was said.
All right. Before we go on to talk in more detail about Vance, Hegseth, Russia's attacks on the rest of Europe, and many other things I want to talk about. Any responses quickly to what Patrick said? Scott?
I'll just say this. There's not a speech that's come out of the West in decades that has the gravitas and the intellectualism and the foresight of Putin's 2007 Munich address. And Vladimir Putin will always be in the history books for that. But let me say this, that wasn't the purpose of Vance's speech, was not to be a word for word comparison with Putin. What happened after Putin spoke in 2007? Not a goddamn thing. See, Vance's speech was the trigger for everything to happen. It was the beginning of the frickin' avalanche. This was pre-planned. This is a multi-front assault on the edifice that was the U.S. transatlantic relationship. It is dead. It is finished. It is done. This is pre-planned with an outcome that's already foreseen. The United States is finished with NATO. It is as dead has ever been. We are going to be pulling troops out of Germany before you know it. When they go to Poland, it will be not part of a NATO transfer of power, but a bilateral relationship between the United States and Poland linked to the cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, after which time the United States will redistribute its forces away from Europe back to the homeland and to the Pacific. Listen to the strategic vision that Hegseth, Vance, and Trump have been talking about. We are done with Europe as a military enterprise. There are ways we can integrate with Europe and work with Europe, but the whole NATO thing, Patrick, I have to disagree. NATO will be dead by this summer. The reason why is that it is a hollowed out, rotten edifice. There's nothing holding it up other than the pretense that there's commonality between the United States and Europe on defense issues. There is no commonality whatsoever between the United States and Europe. There's nothing that defines us jointly anymore, because the only thing that has defined us has been to prop up Russia as an enemy worthy of sustaining a Cold War era relic. That's done. And NATO cannot stand on its own. Europe is going to find out they can't afford it. Keir Starmer can sit there and spit, I ain't paying 5%, and then turn around and say, but we're putting British troops on the ground in Ukraine. What a frickin' moron. This man doesn't understand anything that nobody in Europe does. You don't have any concept of what it really means to be a military power, because they've hidden behind the United States military power for too long. Not a single European nation is capable of meaningful, sustained deployment of troops outside of their soil. That is a truth. That is a fact. They can't do it. France cannot send 12,000 troops to Romania, let alone project 6,000 into Ukraine. And then when the United States says, if you want to send troops to Ukraine, there will be no Article 5 protection. You're on your own. Not a single European soldier will deploy to Ukraine under those circumstances, because Europe cannot stand it up. And here's the thing. When it comes down to it, once you remove America from the equation, Europe is going to have to ask the hard questions. You can't allow, a NATO Secretary General to quote Danish intelligence about an impending Russian threat to define NATO's response. The reality is Europe will have to sit up and understand Russia poses no threat to anyone. There's not a single military professional in the world that can articulate in sound fashion how Russia could pose a military threat to Poland or the Baltics or Romania. The second someone says that, I challenge them to tell me, what is the force structure that would do this? What is the logistical sustainability would do this? Show me what in Russia's defense industry expenditures planned for the next 3 years, where they have factored in a major war with Europe that will require mobilization of up to 3 million men. They haven't, because Russia has no plans on going into Europe. Russia is a defensive-oriented military. One of the reasons why they're having the difficulties they do in Ukraine is that they aren't geared towards massive offensive operations, and they do everything from a defensive posture moving forward. Russia's not going to invade Romania. They're not going to invade Poland. They're not going to invade anybody. Russia simply wants NATO expansion into Ukraine to come to a halt, and for NATO not to disappear, but to go back to its 1997 borders. Well, Russia's going to get a bonus, because I think Trump is done with NATO. The words that are, this is the other thing. This is sort of the bad side of Trump, because he has very thin skin and he is a counter puncher. And all the words that are being said by now by Zelensky, by Starmer, by Schultz, by Macron, by everybody else, if you don't think Trump is writing those down in a ledger and will quote each and every one of those as he deletes Europe from the face of the earth as in terms of American alliances, think again. Trump is not your traditional American politician. He is a revolutionary. And I'll leave it with this. If you don't think there's a connection between what Trump's doing at home and what's going on in Europe, think again. Before he went to Europe, he exposed there's a big word that I'm not going to say. I think venality was the word I was looking for. Hopefully that means evil, of the American foreign policy apparatus, the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, how we were literally in the regime change business and promoting war. And he has gutted that. And he has gutted the Department of Justice. The one thing that could have stood up to him, it is finished. It is gone. The FBI is done. Trump has cleaned house. He's taking it down. Congress doesn't know what to do. And then he went to Europe and he undertook dramatic change. And there's no opposition left in America. There's no one in America left to oppose him. If you don't think he's serious about jamming the stake through the vampire that is NATO and the European Union, and it's going to happen soon. It's happening now as we speak. This isn't going to take years. Europe is unsustainable in its present construct. It can only survive with America, and it can only survive with a Russian enemy. America's making the Russian enemy go away, and America says we're no longer going to pay your bills. It's time for the 32-year-old pimple-faced, fat, internet game playing loser to get out of mommy's basement, go out and get a job. And that's what Europe has to do. Grow up.
And he did all that in 3 weeks. Now,
wait for the fourth week and the fifth week.
who the hell knows? I mean, I can't keep up. But you did predict in the pages of Consortium News, got rid of that, NATO would collapse once under the weight of this conflict in Ukraine. And I have to say that you look like you might be right now. But I want to ask you this about Europe. I argued, you probably did, maybe all of us here at some point, that Europe should be independent of both the U.S. and Russia and be a totally independent, have good relations with the Russians and with the Americans and stand on their own. Well, by default, they're going to be independent, but they're not going to have good relations with Russia right now in terms of what they're saying. But without the U.S. backing them, how are they going to deal with that? What's the future there?
Again, and Patrick is far more learned than I am, and this is just, Scott Ritter, the kid that took a Eurail pass through Europe in the late 70s and early 80s, speaking here. But to me, Europe is a continent defined by Germany, Italy, France, Denmark, the Netherlands, Norway. We can go on. All the wonderful nations of Europe, each nation with their own culture, their history, their background. When I traveled between France and Germany, I knew it because I went from the mark to the franc. And there was a border and they stamped my passport, and that was pretty cool. Then they created this fake thing called the European Union. And it has destroyed European identity because there is no European identity. We see that in Munich as we speak. When you have Germans, French, Italians standing up, trying to define what Europe is now that the United States has insulted Europe, and they can't define it. They're sitting there having internal debates about what Europe is, what Europe should be doing. You got the new Finns coming in now. They think they're part of Europe, so they're going to throw their. You got the Baltic states who have convinced themselves that they are the kings of Europe, telling Europe what to be. Europe has no clue what it is because there is no such thing as Europe. The European Union was a dream that has turned into a nightmare. And I think the future of Europe is to be exactly what Donald Trump. And here's the thing. Europe can't stand on its own. Donald Trump has said that he will no longer deal with the European Union as an entity, that he's going to deal with European states individually. And that's the future right there. And I can tell you right off the bat, the European states that say that they are willing to do business with Russia are the European states that are going to thrive. And the European states that want to pretend that somehow they alone can stand up to, they're the ones that will lose their leadership this quick. The one thing I've been saying all along is that the insanity of the European approach to Ukraine will create a revolutionary change in Europe. I've said this over and over again, and it's going to happen. It's already happened. It's happening in Germany. It happened in Austria, and it will continue to happen as these political and economic elites who sold this ridiculous war to their populations in Ukraine are going to be confronted with the failure of their policy, but it's not just a failure, the inhumanity of their policy. Europe is going to learn to become a continent, a group of nations that embraces genuine humanity, because the Europe today, this European Union, put 1 million damn Ukrainians in the ground. And they're not even blinking at it, and they want to put 1 million more. They're living up to George Soros's fantasy that said we're going to take the European defense industry and use it to provide weapons to an Eastern European manpower base to fight Russia by proxy. That's George Soros's vision, and the European Union bought into it, and they're trying to implement it. This isn't just something to be rejected, it's to be condemned, to be destroyed. And thank God Donald Trump's going to destroy it, because this is an embarrassment to humanity, this thing called Europe. And thank God it's going away. I believe it's going away really, really soon, because it can't be sustained. They have an emergency meeting in Paris. Let's see what comes out of that.
Yeah, indeed. Macron has called for a meeting of various heads of states of European countries to counter the shock that they withstood in Munich. Ray, could you weigh in a little bit more before we go into more detail some of this?
Sure, sure. I think we need to look back to right after World War II. I was just a little fellow then, and Scott wasn't even born. Patrick Roberts neither, okay? But after World War II, there was a mechanism created where U.S. influence would predominate over these war-torn countries, the U.S. having escaped the worst of it, and the instrument was NATO. Now, most people think that that was built in reaction to the creation of the Warsaw Pact. Wrong. Predated the Warsaw Pact by 4 or 5 years, okay? So it's an instrument, and the first Secretary General or generals, I think, was Lord Ismay of Britain. And he defined what the objective was. And it was to keep Russia out, keep America in, and keep Germans down. Okay, so now let's fast forward to today. Okay, America is getting out. The Russians are able to come in now. Look at the readout of the talks between Lavrov and our new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. They're going to repair everything that Obama and that Biden did with respect to just obliterating decent relations between the two countries. They're going to eliminate sanctions, for God's sake. This is completely different. So it'll be up to the West Europeans to decide whether they want to be able to sell their apples in Russia, whether Russia still has a market for Polish or Italian apples. Okay, the sanctions are going to, and the Europeans are going to have to follow suit. Well, that's just one thing. What else? Well, the whole thing is that people will finally come to realize that the Soviet Union, guess what? The Soviet Union fell apart, okay? And the Russians don't want to take over Poland, Baltic states. They don't even want to take over Ukraine, okay? So this whole business about this special military operation, so-called, is that, it was provoked. We know that. It was not full scale because, 90,000 people sent in just to scare the hell out of Zelensky, which worked. And they did an arrangement. I'm going to do all that, okay? But that was rejected by the US and the UK. So it wasn't provoked. It wasn't full scale. Was it illegal? Well, people say, well, look at Article 53 of the UN Charter. Look at these things and you decide yourself. And there have been very creditable lawyers, international lawyers, that have told me this is unsettled law. Now, I'm not going to argue the law part of it, but the unprovoked stuff was a charade. And people are going to be understanding that because a lot of this stuff will be coming out. It's already coming out even in some of our mainstream media. So, yeah, I share I share Scott's enthusiasm and his hope. All I'm saying here is that the military-industrial complex are going to take it on the chin, if this works out the way Trump and I think the Russians want it to. And, if Trump is serious about cutting our defense expenditures in half after getting the Russians and the Chinese to agree to this kind of thing, my God, what are the bankers? What are the military industrial people? What are the people that Pravda used to call the Wall Streetskie kravopitsi, the Wall Street bloodsuckers? What are they going to do? So it's not over until it's over. But I think the last steps of this past week, an incredible week, point in a good direction. And I'm hopeful and I'm enthusiastic. I think that Trump is not afraid to do these things. He doesn't have to get reelected. He doesn't even owe everything he has to Israel lobby anymore. He's been through 4 years of being crushed. I think he's feeling rather free now, and he's going to do what he wants to do. And I think that's a good idea abroad, at least with respect to Ukraine.
Well, Article 53 was, of course, in the UN Charter of Self-Defense, which some people may agree or not was what happened there. And I think there might be some German businessmen, Siemens and other big companies that did so much business with Russia to try to implore to Angela Merkel not to do these sanctions. They might be popping corks tonight with these developments as well. So that's a whole constituency in Germany we haven't heard from. But Elizabeth has a question, a very good question about the military-industrial complex in the U.S., the defense industry, how they're going to react to this.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to know how you think the military-industrial complex in the US will react to all of these developments. I mean, how realistic is it that they will go through, and what recourse do they have to try to stop all of these things going forward? Patrick.
Let me try to begin my answer this way, Elizabeth. Reading a lot of the mainstream news reports over the last few days, notably the Times, not only the Times, but they are hard at it already with the mis and disinformation, the mischaracterizations of practically everything Vance said. Hegseth, same, right? The Trump-Putin call, no, it was all about flattering Trump, no address to the substantive questions at issue, okay? The media, according to Ray, is one constituency in Mickey Matt. And just looking at this little corner of Mickey Matt over the last few days reminds me that any presumption that the sprawling deep state is going to watch with fascination or even quiescent anxiety as all these things unroll is unwise, right? I think what we are looking at, again, the Russian relationship, that is a wonderful move. I don't care what comes out of it. The phone, both people were on the phone, right? The end of Russian isolation is coming. I don't exclude resistance even to that, right? But that seems pretty promising. The rest of it, how will the defense industries respond to this? Sometimes in your question lies your answer. This is a very, very serious matter that is not going to disappear, right? The entrenched interests here are beyond huge. I mean, and the money is what we all know it is, right? We need to see how far we know now Trump's aspirations, right? We do not know how they are going to play out. And again, I'm excluding the direct U.S.-Soviet relations. That seems to be more or less accomplished. The rest of it, I just don't think we can say. With respect to Scott, I really am not waiting for NATO to disappear in the next 2 months, or the military-industrial complex, or the EU, or any other such entities. We have to be careful.
It might be up to the Republican members of Congress who have the majority to resist the end treaties of lobbyists from the military-industrial complex. I think that's where it's going to take place, this confrontation, if it does. No, Scott, what do you think?
No. I mean, look, history will find out what happens with NATO and the EU. But let me say something. Patrick said something early on that I think needs to be reinforced. That clearly Trump learned some lessons from his first 4 years. And now I hope that Ray will back me up on this observation, because this is it's telling. If one of the major thrusts of the conversation between Rubio and Lavrov was to repair the damage done by the Obama era insult to Russian diplomacy, Donald Trump has somebody talking to him who knows a hell of a lot about Russia. And that person has not been identified yet, because none of the people that are listed as the experts, as the advisors to Trump, have the ability to know how important that is to the Russians, the damage that did to American credibility. You see, the Russians can have policy differences. That's not a problem. I spent hours with Anatoly Antonov, and we didn't have a conversation that didn't touch upon the insult of what America has done to Russian diplomats. And the fact that Rubio is moving to repair that means that somebody who is informed on the topic has got the ear of the president, who has the ear of Rubio. And the reason why I bring this up is I don't think Trump is doing anything in a haphazard fashion. I think this is one of the most well planned out revolutions that we have seen, because it's happening at breakneck speed. Donald Trump is not taking anything for chance here. So therefore, for Trump to say he's going to cut the Pentagon budget by 50% and he's going to attack the nuclear weapons complex, two things. One, the Pentagon is about to become audited. And when the Pentagon becomes audited, that is the end of the military-industrial complex as we know it today. It will be exposed as one of the greatest perpetrators of fraud in American history. And when the American people, when American politicians are confronted with the extent of the fraud, waste, and abuse that is directly linked to congressional failure to oversee the corruption of Congress. You see, Trump is declaring war against Congress as well. Trump knows every single point that held him back in his first term. And Congress and the Republicans in Congress were one of those main points. So was the Department of Justice. I hope, whether you like it or not, you know that the Department of Justice is dead in terms of what it used to be. That he has gutted every single one of the attorneys, the attorney generals, the FBI agents that were involved in the Russia nonsense. They're gone. They're finished. Whether that's right or wrong, whether that's good for justice, constitutional, doesn't matter. He has cleaned that out. Trump also knows the obstacles that came to him from the military-industrial complex. He is going to destroy them. You are not going to see a purge of anything like you're going to see of the corruption of the military. This is his rallying cry to end corruption in Washington, D.C. And the Pentagon is a $1 trillion corruption machine. And so this doesn't happen in a vacuum. He's about to go to war against the Pentagon, and that's the end of resistance. And when we speak of the media, there's a reason why he has a South African named Elon Musk standing next to him. And that reason is that X is now the defining media for the Trump administration. Nothing else matters. If you think the New York Times headlines mean anything today in this world, it doesn't. It feeds Democratic angst, it feeds residual Republican opposition, but it doesn't drive anything policy-wise in Washington, D.C., except for a counterpunch. This administration has declared war. They cleaned house, Joe. They went in and said, get the hell out of the Pentagon, get the hell out of the White House. We're not dealing with you anymore. You no longer matter to us. We don't care what CNN says. We don't care what the AP says. The New York Times, the Washington Post, you're dead to us. Joe Rogan come in, X come in, all that. Whether this is good or bad isn't the point. I personally am uncomfortable with it because I think it's very fast. But the point is, this is a revolution. And the revolution has said, he learned this. Patrick was 100% right. He learned you have to control the information narrative. And this Trump administration will never let up on controlling the narrative. And one way to do that is to ensure that any potential outlet for a counter narrative is annulled, minimized. And this is there is a captain at the helm of this ship, and his name is Donald Trump, and he knows what the hell he's doing right now. Everything he has done, this is not by accident. The rapidity of things that are happening here are happening because he is briefed. He has a plan. He knows what he wants to accomplish. There's no guesswork taking place. And the other thing is, it's happening so fast that nobody can respond. The moment he doesn't give you a chance to say, okay, we're going to deal with the fact that he's gone after dropping the charges against Mayor Adams in New York City. Normally that would dominate a 6-month news cycle. Hey, no one saw it because it's done, it's finished, it's done, gone. They've moved on to something else. There are so many headline grabbing things that have happened in just these 3 weeks, things that would normally chew up a news cycle for months, and they're just overcome by events. So he's overwhelming the media and he's nullifying the media. He's taking control. This is a revolution in every way, shape, and form. And I'm so happy because it's the only thing that could save America. America was going to hell in a handbasket. We were going down a path that was going to lead to global nuclear annihilation and the destruction of everything I stand for. Now, I'm not saying that I stand for everything Trump is doing. What I'm saying is he is destroying that which was destroying America. And from the ruins of what he is creating, hopefully we can get something good. That is our job as citizens, is to, bird dog him and try and build something new, to plant some seeds. And he's burning down the forest. And so we've got to go plant some seeds and see what we can grow in its stead. But that forest had to die, man. This has to happen. It has to be a top to bottom destruction of everything that defined America previously, because what defined America wasn't the vision of America. It wasn't constitutionality. It wasn't the rule of law. Do I take this personally? Yeah, you can, again, just not pretend here that I don't have a grudge here. I had 40 frickin' FBI agents storm through my door. 40 come into my house because of my free speech. If you think for a second I don't take this personally, you're insane. I take this as personal as it gets. But on top of that, I can pull back and be objective. This was destroying our country. The Biden administration, the Obama administration, the Bush administration, the Clinton administration, every administration since the end of the Cold War was leading America down a path towards hell, on a highway to hell. And we finally have a guy who doesn't give a damn, stepping in and saying, I'm done with it. I'm tearing it all up. And I think there's too many people that say, I don't believe this is happening. And therefore they believe it can't happen. I don't believe it. It's happening. It's happening. And it's happening at a pace that nobody can anticipate. And I just think we're going to be in for a hell of a ride. And I, for one, I'm so happy the FBI, I want everybody that came into my house with a badge to lose their jobs, and I won't cry for them. I want every attorney that signed off on that search warrant to lose their jobs. I want everybody in Washington, D.C. that it was said it was okay to weaponize the Department of Justice to go after American citizens for speaking their mind, for exercising their free speech. They need to be unemployed, and if they broke the law, they need to be in jail. This is the kind of revolutionary change we need. There must be consequences for the actions these people have done. And I will guarantee you this, the military-industrial complex, you're going to see people frog marched out of their industrial headquarters in handcuffs, going to jail because they have committed crimes beyond belief. The robbery of the American people by the military-industrial complex will be exposed. This is how he cuts the defense budget by 50%. He doesn't need to ask anybody for permission. He will expose the corruption. This is how he destroyed the Department of Justice, exposing the corruption. This is how he destroyed the fraud of U.S. foreign aid, by exposing the corruption. America was the single most corrupt nation on the planet. We still are in many ways. And he's exposing the corruption. And this is beautiful. It's beautiful.
There's no doubt that the speed is essential to what he's doing. He couldn't get away with this without going as fast. Scott asked you, Ray, whether you'd back him up. So will you back him up?
Well, just on that one thing.
Well, I back Scott up at 95% of what he's just said. I would point out, well, I thank Scott and Patrick for knowing about the Mickey Mat, the military, industrial, congressional intelligence, media, academia, think tank complex, okay? Sort of rhymes with Mickey Mouse. Remember it, Mickey Mouse, okay? Now, I always say media as in all caps, okay? Because media is the fulcrum. Without the media, you can't do all this other stuff, okay? So that is the key. And I hope that Scott is right about the changes that are in play, because my son and webmeister said to me 3 years ago, go on X, Dad. Is it X? Yeah, go on X. Now I have just this week 75,000 followers, whatever followers means. But I think that's good. Now, that's not as much as Scott has and others, but, there are people reacting, okay? Now, when you go to the Russiagate stuff, and Patrick needs a special applause on this, because he stuck his neck out, believing veteran intelligence professionals for sanity, publishing our conclusions about the fraud of Russiagate, and lost his job with the nation, okay? I just mentioned that in passing. But it was consequential in the first place because it persuaded 90% of the Americans that Russia is evil, that Putin is the devil, and we really have to, it was. So what did that mean? That meant that the Americans probably would have said, well, looks like if Biden says we need to drop a little nuke there in Europe to stop Putin's advance into Ukraine, Poland, and the Baltics, well, we'll do it. Okay, that's one way it was consequential. The other way, and the more relevant today, is the fact that Trump knows chapter and verse. Not only was he the victim of all this stuff, but he knows that President Obama personally took up the cudgels to help Hillary Clinton win the election, and he used Russiagate for that purpose. Here's the proof of that. Lots of stuff has come out in testimony now. You ought to know that when Jake Sullivan told Hillary Clinton, I know what we can do. We can blame those terrible emails that were hacked, that the Russians did that to help Hillary win the election, and it didn't happen, but the Russians did it. Now, there was no evidence, zero evidence of that. And so they put this proprietary, they put this CrowdStrike outfit on it, led by a guy who worked for the head of the CIA, head of the FBI for 20 years, okay? So he comes and he says, oh yeah, the Russians did it. And then Obama says, Obama, mind you, that's not enough. We have to put out a paper. Oh, we're going to put a paper about this. How about you, CIA, DIA? Let's wait till CrowdStrike does the forensics. Well, they're very slow, very slow. What are you going to do with forensics? Well, maybe the last part of October. Too late. So what does Obama do? He goes to the head of the Department of Department of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, and he goes to James Clapper, head of the National Intelligence Director. He says, please put out a memo now, okay? Because we only have a month to win this election, and so they do. And Jay Johnson later says, "Oh my God, this was awful. We had this great pressure. Nobody else would do it, and so I went ahead. And I put some caveats in there, but yeah, we published that, and we know from Hillary's people they were off and running. That's where they went to all the press with all this stuff, and as a consequence of that, Russian diplomats were thrown out. Russian diplomats, the premises owned by Russia were confiscated. And even after Hillary won, Obama was so vindictive that he did more against Russia than he really ever had to, even though she had lost. Okay. And in his 2 days before he leaves office, he says, I have to say that those Russians are terrible, but we don't really know how those DNC emails got to WikiLeaks. We don't know that. So here's a lawyer covering his derriere because he's on record of saying, "Oh, it's a sure thing." Well, they didn't know, and those in the know knew that it was all a big hoax, if you will, but a consequential one. In the first place, as I illustrated, because everybody hates Russia, but now it's consequential because Trump doesn't have to be a very vindictive guy to regret what happened to him for 4 years when he was unable to create a decent relationship with Russia. Well, now he can. And just yesterday, the Foreign Minister Lavrov said to Rubio, "Look, we know what Obama did. We're gonna work out. We're going to give those properties back to us. We're going to expand our diplomatic presence, and we're going to have a real decent relationship as we used to do back in the day." So this, I think, is not only psychologically important to understand where Trump is coming from, but I think Scott is quite right in saying he's angry. He's got the power right now to do it. The only break on this, and I'll say again, is the Mickey Mat, okay? And the last thing I'll say is this. I listened to the whole Senate hearing that approved the $63 billion more for Ukraine. It was in the fall of the year before last, okay? And every senator but one said, "Look, we're not giving this money to Ukraine. We're giving this money to the military industrial institutes that work in your states and your jobs." And every one of them said that except Chris Von Holland from Maryland. It was so transparent. This wasn't going to help Ukraine. This was to help the Mickey Mat. Okay. So it's a big bridge, and these senators are in it up to their necks. And how are they going to do without the factories that make these very expensive places things that don't really work very well? Enough said on that. I hope I'm not too emotional about this, because I know emotions are to be suppressed on these things.
We
Right,
like
Scott?
emotion. Right? We like emotion. There's so many angles to this story, to this unfolding story. Then one of them now you've just made clear, Ray, is that this really is the final nail in the Russiagate coffin. Isn't that right, Patrick Lawrence, who opened that coffin to begin and showed how ugly this story was from the very beginning? You were the one who really broke it first during the convention, I believe. Is this the end of Russiagate now, amongst all the other things we're discussing?
Russiagate, it kind of comes back from the dead, right? I think it's now so far in the past that we have to look at what it has left behind, right? You can still read in the major papers, in matter-of-fact terms, that Russia interfered with our elections in 2016 and stole the mail and all that, right? You can still read that, right? But I don't think it's the compelling question it was. But we have to look at what it left behind in its trail. Very considerable animosity toward the Russian Federation, and it licensed everyone on Capitol Hill and elsewhere to stand foursquare against the Russians. without any equivocation. In other words, it was an important tilt in policy, right? It's part of what made Biden's extremist stance toward Russia possible, right? It gave us the disinformation industry, the misinformation industry, the license to censorship and all that, right? These are very considerable messes, right? You know, they're with us. They're part of our polity now. You know, there's a lot of work to be done to get rid of them. So yeah, Russiagate's gone. I think that, you know, time heals all things is sort of the basic principle there, but it left a lot in its wake, right? Let me return to our topic here. Cast against the background of Russiagate, just as we've been discussing it, you have to appreciate Trump's initiative still toward Moscow even more. He never lost. You could see this during his first term, even when the deep state was all over him, had him roped up like a steer, right? He never lost his determination, his recognition that better relations with Russia are desirable. And, you know, we're seeing that now. I have one other thing to say. I think maybe my best contribution to our talk this evening, it's not very popular among us, I sense, but I think we better be pretty cautious in our expectations.
Okay.
Well, I'll just say this about the cautious and expectations. George Espat, audacity, audacity, audacity. I normally, Patrick, I'm 100% behind you. You don't want to get ahead of your skis. You want to make sure that you have the legal documents and you've done your due diligence and you got the T's crossed and the I's dotted and you've counted the votes and all this kind of stuff. But that's playing the establishment game. That's how the establishment owns you, by taking down the path of going through procedures then that they can control, they can delay, they can oppose, they can undermine, they can do this. A revolution's about taking that all off the table. And I honestly think we're in a revolution. And I don't know if it's about, you know, managing expectations other than I expect everything to be destroyed. And I think everything will be destroyed. I think, you know, the destruction is a relative term. For instance, the military-industrial complex. I think there will be people arrested. I think there will be senators and congressmen who will be arrested as well. I think the level of corruption is beyond comprehension to the average American. And then I think Trump is going to take control of defense spending. When the American people find out that the money they thought was going to a certain program was really going into the pockets of a congressman who was putting it into offshore accounts and all this stuff, they're not going to be so thrilled with those. Something I'm not happy with, but I see happening, is I see the United States heading down the path of building this so-called Iron Dome. And this is $1 trillion exercise. And I think that what we have found is an employment vehicle that Trump will then use to bring control over Congress by doling out contracts and retooling plants and spreading the money differently. But it won't be corrupt. It'll be, I mean, I guess we could call that a form of corruption, but it's you know, when you say you're spending $1 on X, $1 will be spent on X. At least it will be that honest. And this is what I have to say about Donald Trump, and I get in trouble saying this all the time. And anybody who's been following me on Trump knows that I'm not a fan of Donald Trump, anything but. He's the most honest president we've ever had in modern times. because he just says what he says. He doesn't try to hide it. He says it. It's in your face. Sometimes I wish he was more politically correct, but you know, I don't see any subterfuge here. I don't see a man who's trying to schmooze you, and he's not Barack Obama saying one thing, doing another. What you see is what you get with Donald Trump, for better or for worse. And this is refreshing. And that's part of the revolution. I think we're getting to a stage now when Donald Trump puts out a defense budget, and we look at the numbers in that defense budget, we'll have confidence that the American taxpayer dollars are being allocated responsibly to the defense needs articulated by the Trump administration. Right now, the Pentagon can't tell us where $1 trillion goes. And that's disgusting. And I also think that the day and age of giant bills going through Congress that nobody reads to hide USAID corruption and all that is over too. See, this is a revolution of executive congressional relationships. The way laws are going to be made. There's going to be a level of integrity that's going to be imposed on American politicians, because the consequences to America for the lack of oversight, for letting Congress. I mean, people are only now asking the question, how does somebody who makes $178,000 a year in 10 years suddenly have a net worth of $40 million? I mean, these are fair questions. What relationships that, and then how does everybody around this person likewise suddenly drive Porsches, have beach houses in the Hamptons? It's because of the corruption of the system. And everything about this system is corrupt. And the defense industry is one of the most corrupt, and I don't think it's going to survive. I know that they are powerful. I know they have, but the revolution, Trump has had 4 years to literally decipher how Washington, D.C. works. He's not a stupid man. And he has picked out all of the weaknesses because he understands corruption. He understands how this works. And he's brought in a man who just doesn't care. Elon Musk. Who is Elon Musk beholden to? What defense industry can buy out Elon Musk? Now, somebody might say that the Lockheed Martin could. No, they can't, because Elon Musk, they can't. Lockheed Martin doesn't have the tool set anymore. The tool set's been removed. The Department of Justice has been gutted. There is no tool set. Elon Musk works for the President of the United States, who is the most unitary executive. He's perfected the art of the unitary executive, the execution of unitary executive power. And he's taken to heart the Supreme Court's ridiculous decision last year about decriminalizing. Yeah.
Scott, are we supposed to admire or approve of Elon Musk?
If Elon Musk can slash $2 trillion from the American budget and expose corruption, you're damn right I admire and approve. I don't care about his personal life. I don't care about anything. If he is the guy who can go in there and expose USAID corruption, who is going to do that besides him?
I just wanted to know.
Get a State Department.
I just wanted to know your view. That's all.
And I'm no expert on Elon Musk either, but he does have his own contracts with defense industries and the government, correct?
Sure. And who's going to touch those contracts now?
Yeah,
because last time I checked, we have a president who was told by the Supreme Court that you cannot break the law if you're doing presidential things. And everything the president's doing right now, look, we are very close to a dictatorship. We are dangerously close to a dictatorship. And this is what scares me. This scares me to death. Under normal circumstances, would I want Elon Musk doing what Elon Musk is doing? No. But we're not in normal circumstances. We are in a revolution. That's what I am trying to impart on people. This is revolutionary what's happening. And so we need an Elon Musk. We need a Donald Trump. We need a Pam Bondi, and we need a Kash Patel to come in and literally gut the entire system. Because if we don't, then we lose.
Yeah, Joe?
Yes, Ray, go ahead. Jump in.
Yeah. You finally mentioned Kash Patel, who is even more key, it seems to me, than Elon Musk. It looks like Kash will be confirmed by the full Senate this coming week. And then Trump will have a fellow who's been around a while, who knows where all the bodies are buried. who can actually point out chapter and verse now without even having to look in his files what James Comey and John Brennan and all those folks did to sabotage, try to prevent Trump from being elected, and then after elected, making him sort of emasculated. But he's also going to know, or he's going to be able to find out things like, let's see, what was the name of that fellow that was killed on July 10th? Oh, Seth Rich. Seth Rich. Now,
Whoa.
I hope mentioning that name doesn't screw up our YouTube availability. But if Kash Patel doesn't know who hired the murderers of Seth Rich yet, he will know. Matter of fact, most people aren't aware of this, but on the 7th of March, the FBI is going to have to come up with all the things, not all the things, but most of the things they had on file with respect to Seth Rich's computer, personal one, his office computer, which they've been hiding, which they took from the Metropolitan DC Police. What's his name? Christopher Wray, of recent memory, lied. He said 3 years ago, oh, we checked our files. There's nothing on Seth Rich. And the judge says, you better go back and check them again. The judge's name is Masson. Okay, this is an ongoing court case. Well, they came back and they said, oh my God, thanks for encouraging us to look again. But we have 55,000 records. And so we to sort through those monumental task, and there's COVID here. It will take us about 2.5 years to sort this out, to give it to the plaintiff. And the judge said, no, you're going to do it by February 7th, 2025. February 7th came. The FBI said, oh, we need 1 more month. Watch what happens on March 7th, 2025. To see if the FBI is honest enough under a new management to come up with information about who killed Seth Rich. This is big. This is very big. And I say it, I hope that people don't object to it, but the circumstantial case is very clear. In my view, why we can't discuss it is disgusting.
Well, maybe we can. Well, I'm certainly going to allow you to, but that might be the last chapter in Russiagate, which may not be over. And that you bring up the censorship question, which I want to get into when we talk about Vance's speech, which he said some things that kind of blew me away. I did not expect him to bring those things up. But before we do, I want to ask Scott one more thing about NATO. First of all, we should point out that Trump maybe has a few people around him that are better than last time. He doesn't have Pompeo and Bolton around him. And he's got Tulsi Gabbard, who's not good on Gaza and Israel. We all know that. But she certainly understands what happened in Ukraine, that it was, as you said, Ray, totally provoked by the United States, that this entire myth that's still believed that Putin woke up one day and spun the globe, put his finger there, happened to land on Ukraine. Okay, I'll invade Ukraine. That there was no reason why he did this except of his evilness. So we know by looking at the background of what happened, the rejection, by the way, of those 3 treaties, the 2 treaties to NATO and the United States in December 2021, which I want to also bring up later. I think that's where we're headed. That was always going to be the solution to the Ukraine crisis, that Russia will eventually have to go back to those 2 treaties, and the United States and NATO are going to have to accept them. But Scott, in a way, this is taking away the offensive capability, would you say, of NATO. So they can no longer be going to Afghanistan, no longer be going to Libya, outside of their theater that their charter allows them. And that, in a sense, that ends really a survival of at least a remnant of European colonialism and imperialism by acting through U.S. NATO into developing countries. We're going to see the end of this in this bloody revolution we're talking about tonight?
Well, let's just look at one aspect. It's not just NATO, it's the European Union. The European Union has allowed itself to become militarized in the past. And I'll give you an example. In the Sahel, France had their France-Afrique, their post-colonial militarized presence. And Chad, in Niger, in Mali, in Senegal, and in some other places as well. And we turned that into a front in the global war on terror. And France committed to deploy thousands of additional troops. They couldn't get there without American transport. Okay, this wasn't a NATO thing. NATO doesn't have a military transport capability. You have individual nations that have done it, but the United States has done the heavy lifting for NATO from day one. NATO can't do anything without America. Nothing. No sustainable military action can be done, logistically or otherwise. Planning, intelligence. Good luck having NATO start doing intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance prep for any operation. You unplug America. They speak of the Five Eyes, the organization there. You remove America and you've got four blind eyes. The world can do nothing competently without us because we have been leading in every way, shape, and form from the get-go. And so when people talk about getting from A to Z with what airlift capacity you're going to use, sustainable. I'm not talking about a surge where you in one day can fly a few thousand troops. Sustainable airlift capacity to continue the airlift. If you don't have the United States plugged in, it doesn't happen. Sea lift, the same thing. Actual air power, the ability to project air power, to plan, to do integrated. When we speak of the integration of NATO, there's only one thing that integrates NATO, and that is the United States. NATO countries integrate with the United States, and the United States integrates with NATO Command and Control, which is run by the United States. You remove the United States from this, and it suddenly collapses. It's like one of those stupid, what's that game with all the wooden blocks? Jenga or something like that. And you got all the wooden blocks. But now if we went in and we just made, 4/5 of the blocks, we just painted them blue and said, that's America's contribution. Now remove the 4/5 of the blocks and see how the tower stands. It doesn't. NATO can't stand without America. And Donald Trump is going to pull out of NATO very soon, especially if Europe continues to set the case. Trump is letting Europe weave its own rope. So to give you an example, Europe is demanding a security presence in Ukraine. Right now, you got the French saying that they're going to put 25,000 French and British soldiers in Ukraine. No, they are not. They cannot do it. And they won't have Article 5 protection. So even the first contingent that goes in, let's call it 1,200, no, it'll be 600, about a battalion will go in. Probably French, because the British don't have a battalion right now that can deploy. So the French will put a battalion into a Romanian port, and then they'll put it into a Romanian airfield, and then they'll push it into a Ukrainian airfield, and then it will be killed on the spot. And that's it. The French just lost a battalion. And what are they going to do? Scream NATO? NATO is a consensus-driven organization. The United States will immediately veto, not just the United States, but other nations as well. Said you didn't go in under NATO protection. There wasn't even an Article 4 cover for you. This is why I'm saying NATO's dead, because what Europe is going to realize is that, and you already see this, one of the things, I guarantee this is going to come out of Paris, the need for an alternative military alliance, a European military alliance. Europe cannot afford to sustain NATO and a European security alliance simultaneously. So the moment Europe says we need to have this because we can't trust the United States anymore, that is literally the end of NATO. And NATO isn't one of these institutions the United States cares about drawing down. We're just going to kill it. It will die. And NATO is so corrupt. When you want to speak of corruption, NATO has literally become an employment vehicle for the political and economic elite of Europe. The sons of sons of sons, who there all go to NATO and they get ridiculous jobs to do nothing. They have logistics organizations, they have political organizations, they have organizations that exist just have meeting after meeting after meeting. They do nothing to contribute to genuine war fighting. NATO has forgotten how to fight wars. NATO doesn't know how to fight a war. That's just honest to God's truth. There's not a single NATO formation today that could survive on the Ukrainian battlefield for more than a week. They have no clue what's going to hit them with drones. Right now, the Russians in the Recourse area are dealing with the Ukrainian army that is surging 10 to 15,000 drones at one time. As the Russians come in, drones are literally hovering. It's like something out of a science fiction novel where the drones are boom, coming down, boom, coming. You move, you die, boom, boom, boom. Look at the trees, the fiber optics now, because they were being jammed. The fiber optics now, look at the trees. They have nothing but walls of fiber optics going through the trees as the drones drive their way through the trees. And the Ukrainians are losing. I'm just telling you, Ukrainians are doing this and they're losing because the Russians do it even better. And now Europe wants to come into this drone warfare environment. Europe has no clue what war is. Every single European, and the Americans don't either. We have no idea what's happening there. And we haven't adapted our forces to survive in this. And they want to put people in there. Peacekeeping implies both parties agree to it. The only way peacekeeping works is when both parties say, we agree to the presence of peacekeepers, and these are the rules that the peacekeepers come in. Europe is not seeking peacekeeping. Europe is seeking to impose a reality on Russians who have not been defeated. Not only have they not been defeated, but they are victorious. They dominate the battlefield in every way, shape, or form. And you want to take a European army that can't fight, can't sustain itself, doesn't know anything about the realities, and project them there. They will lose the battle before they get to the front line because of logistics. I'm just going to count the gallons of gas necessary to transport a battalion out of Romania into Ukraine. I used to do this for a living, guys. This is I was an artillery battalion, and we used to sit there and plan about how we're going to move the battalion in a combat-like situation. How do we refuel on the move? How do we do it in a way that makes us less vulnerable to the enemy? How do we do it so that we're not detected? How do we do it to sustain operations so everything doesn't come to a halt? We trained for years to perfect this. NATO doesn't train anymore. And now they're going to come in and try and do this in real life against the Russian capability. It's monitoring from day one. And the moment they pause, bam, 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 the Iskanders hit them and kill them all. NATO's a freaking joke, a literal joke. It stands for nothing. It does nothing. It's unable to do anything except fraud, waste, and abuse. And that's the reality.
You got to give the Ukrainians were able to hit the roof of Chernobyl. By the way, the Ukrainians are good shots.
Ask them to release the serial number of the fragments that they they showed fragments of the Geron 2, but they blurred the serial. Why? They say it's because they don't want the Russians to know which one hit it, so the Russians don't know how they got through the air defense.
I see.
They say, no, the Russians didn't. You release that, and Ray, I think, knows this. Every piece of munition or equipment that's produced by the Russians has a passport attached to it. And that passport has their serial number, and that tracks the movement of the thing from the factory to the unit, maintenance, etc. And when the thing is fired, the passport says, expended, and it has an expenditure log, and that expenditure log tells you on whose authority and against what target on what day. Release the serial numbers, Ukraine. Release them, and then I will lead the fight to get the Russians to release the expenditure log. And if they fired against Chernobyl, it'll be right there in black and white. But the Russians will release a log that shows that it was probably fired about a week and a half prior against a military target, and the Ukrainians simply took that debris and planted it at Chernobyl. The Russians never fired a drone at Chernobyl. That's a false flag attack.
That's all that got left. The Ukrainians. Ray, sorry.
No, I just want to disagree with Scott vigorously about his statement that NATO is good for nothing. Have you been in the new NATO headquarters in Brussels?
I have actually. I got a tour once. Yes.
Oh, okay. Were you able to eat in the executive dining room?
No, I didn't do that.
How was the food in just the normal cafeteria for the hoi polloi? Really good, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So there's $1 billion building that we have to deal with, okay? And I got a solution, folks. Make half of it a hospital, make the other half a hostel for people who don't have a place to live in Brussels, which is a lot of people now, okay? You know, I refer to a speech that Putin made 10 days ago, okay? I was really interested in it because it seemed like down in the details, you know? He says, we're worried about healthcare. Now, we have pretty much free universal healthcare, but you have to have a card. Now, the folks that we have coming in, refugees from Ukraine and elsewhere, don't have a card for 6 months. I am introducing, I'm trying to get the Duma to fix that, give them a card right away so they can get the health care that they deserve. Putin. I mean, this is not the guy that I've been taught about by the major media in the country. And universal health care. Oh, no. Am I some sort of communist or socialist? No, I would like everyone to have health care. So this terrible guy that's been depicted as a beast is not only incredibly smart, but he cares about mundane things like refugees being taken care of. So that's the other side of Putin. Look at his origins. Look at his brother that was killed in the war. Look at his mother and father in that famous photo. They're simple people. He knows what it's like to be deprived. And that's one reason why he is so popular in Russia right now. I mean, if you're 70, 80% popular, I mean, you can't do much better than that.
Elizabeth, do you have any questions you'd like to ask you?
No, I think I'm good, actually. I think we've had a huge discussion.
It's a tremendous discussion. I want to just say a few things about and get some answers from you guys about Vance's speech, because as I said, quite extraordinary. He gave examples that were quite what you would expect from the conservative side of things, like a guy praying too close to an abortion clinic being arrested in the UK. But he also made this comment that I found. I want to get your reaction to this. He said that MPs from the Bundestag, from the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, and Sarah Wagenknecht's party, which used to be the Linke, they were both denied presence in the conference, in the Munich conference, where I'm sure that CDU and Social Democratic MPs were allowed in there. So that was quite a point. He is talking about extremist centrism, centrist extremists. This is, I think, Tariq Ali is the first time I heard anybody bring up this point. There aren't just left-wing extremists or right-wing extremists. There are also centrist extremists. And this is what we got here, who are holding on to the status quo, which, as Scott's been saying tonight very persuasively, I think, is being assaulted in this revolt. Ray?
Well, yeah, I noticed that. And it was a very clearly made point. You know, where is the AfD? They're not represented here. Where are other smaller parties? They're not allowed to come, even though this is Germany. They wouldn't even have to take a plane here, right? Okay. They were bored by the organizers of this conference, says J.D. Vance. And then, worse still, he goes and meets with one of the leaders of the AfD, okay, and also headed the Christian Democrats, the guy who's supposed to win the majority of the votes. You know, I haven't been able, I've talked to several of my German friends in Europe. I haven't been able to get any of them to project what effect Vance will have on the German election just 1 week from now. But my guess, and it's just a guess, is that the AfD is going to win a majority, for God's sake. Even beat the CDU, which is favored to win. And then there's going to be all hell to pay in Germany because they will not be able to deal with this. Now, among the AfD's programs is a strong military. Whoa, you know, if the U.S. is getting out they're going to lead, they're going to be a good argument for a decent military. The Bundeswehr is worth zero right now. It used to be worth like 3 decades ago. It was the strongest army in Europe. So this may win them the marginal increment that they need. And it's going to be really interesting because the first effects of J.D. Vance's talk, I think, will be played out in this election. And again, my experts won't even venture a guess, but I think what he did and what he said will strengthen the AfD for good or ill, and it'll completely revolutionize the political situation in Germany.
There were members of the U.S. Congress at that. There are every year members of the U.S. Congress, but not members of the Bundestag.
And all kinds of the media, all kinds of media and guests and everything. It was surely for him to pick out that little reality is very explosive in Germany if the controlled media, more controlled than it is even here, for God's sake, is able to break through and elucidate some of these things in these next 7 days.
Yeah, the election is coming up on the 23rd in exactly 7 days from now, and it's a significant election indeed. But Vance talked again about, he didn't mention something like the UK's Terrorism Act, under which our friend Craig Murray and our friend Richard Medhurst and several other people have been detained and interrogated and still have prosecution hanging over their heads, what, for things that they'd written. I mean, I never expected an American vice president to come to, in any forum, let alone right there in front of their faces, on their own home territory of Europe, to condemn them for this kind of censorship and what we know happened to Scott, as he mentioned earlier, with the FBI coming in his house. So this is part of this revolt. I found this, being in the media, this such an incredibly important speech and surprising. Are you guys surprised? Mm-hmm.
Let me put it this way, from my perspective. First of all, I want to give Patrick's there a chance to speak, because I think we've been drowning him out, and I feel sort of guilty.
He's gone. He's left for some reason. We'll find out.
All right. But again, I want to put more emphasis on not the substance of what Vance said, but the purpose behind it. Like Davos, the Munich Security Conference is a carefully scripted event where the European powers are seeking certain outcomes. And what the Munich Security Conference was supposed to do was to put America in its place, was to tell Donald Trump that you don't get to call the shots, that Ukraine is still a player here, and we are a power to be dealt with, that you're just this upstart who came in. Because let's just, again, back up a little bit. Europe committed suicide in the summer and fall of 2024 when they agreed with the Biden administration to Trump-proof their policies, to undermine Donald Trump. They made this as personal as you can possibly make something. All right, they're not innocent here. And then they now tried to convince Donald Trump that they are his friends. He doesn't view any single one of these Europeans as friends. They are all his enemies because they all plotted against him openly in the lead up to his presidency. So we have to keep that in mind. So when he sent J.D. Vance there, the job of J.D. Vance wasn't to play the European game, to be the vice president who comes in and gives a speech about democracy and shared values, and, to reiterate that we have a sacred obligation to quote Joe Biden, to NATO. No, his job was to disrupt the entire thing. Everything he said was designed to be disruptive, to throw the Europeans off, to generate an internal fight amongst the Germans, to get the British to be outraged, to get the Europeans in general to be out. And it worked. They never recovered. After J.D. Vance spoke, the Munich Security Conference agenda was out the window. They never recovered, and they still aren't recovering. Just today, some pathetic German got up in front of them and cried because he can't handle what J.D. Vance did to poor Europe. Europe will never, this is why I'm convinced there is no Europe. Europe stands for nothing. These people are fake. They wanted to come in and create a fake narrative based upon this artificial, structure. And J.D. Vance came in and went boom, 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 boom. Not because of any of his points are worth following up on. I mean, they are, but they're not. And they're not going to be followed up on. Where's the big American policy initiative to come in? Yes, he went out and he met with the AfD people because I think the American goal is to kick Schultz out. Why? Because Schultz is an enemy of the United States of America from the perspective of the Trump administration. J.D. Vance did not meet with him because he is an enemy of America. But there's not going to be effective follow-up because the follow-up is the destruction of Europe. What J.D. Vance did is came in and made sure that the Munich Security Conference did not achieve any of the agenda items that the Europeans had set out to achieve, that the Ukrainians had set out to achieve, because Hegseth had given Zelensky the stiff arm at the Ramstein contact group, a couple of days prior. So the Europeans were going to come in and reestablish European control. The British were going to take control. The Germans were going to assert control. The French were going to dominate. And J.D. Vance came in, and next thing you know, all of Europe's internal fighting, pointing fingers, yelling, screaming, shouting. That's the importance of J.D. Vance's speech. It was the most singularly disruptive speech at a time when that achieved the greatest positive outcome, because the thing that's going to save the world is peace between America and Russia. And one of the greatest impediments towards that is the European Union and NATO. And J.D. Vance's job was to work hand in glove with Pete Hegseth and come in and say, we're nullifying every aspect of you. Nothing you think you stand for exists anymore. We don't respect you. We're shutting you out. We're spurning you. I'll leave it with this, the hypocrisy of Europe. How dare Donald Trump meet with the Russians without the Ukrainians being involved? How dare he? Macron, an emergency meeting of all the European Union people, and Ukraine's not invited. It's just like, okay, the consistency of Europe is amazing. Europe is finished. It's checkmate. Trump won. It's over. And I know Patrick is far more experienced in these issues than I am. I'm very emotional, and that's why I wanted him to be able to chime in. But I also am a professional analyst that has a fairly good track record of calling things, even when I get emotional. And I'm calling it. It's game, set, match. Das Vidania, Wiedersehen. Goodbye, NATO. Goodbye, European Union. Why? Because they're nothing without America, and America is in the process of jettisoning them both.
Well, we're both trained as professional journalists, Patrick and I, and we're trained to be skeptical and to not jump to conclusions. So I think we may have seen some of that in there. And I want to see it happen too, but it's taking my breath away. There's no question about it, how these things are happening. I would like to go to final question about what we can look forward to in Saudi Arabia. But before we do that, Elizabeth wanted to make a point about they're not blaming them about, why don't you do it? Sorry, Elizabeth. Yeah.
Well, basically, it strikes me that all of these developments are so drastic and so, world upending, and yet we aren't seeing the media, especially in the U.S., going after Trump and Vance and the rest as Russian puppets, Putin puppets, and all of that, the way that we would have in Trump's first term. I think that the media has really been defanged when it comes to Russiagate, And I just wanted your thoughts on that, especially you, Ray, after everything we all went through during Russiagate.
Well, defanged, I think, maybe a little strong. They're just recovering. It was a big shock, you know. I used the word unprecedented as soon as I saw what I watched Vance speak. And it's unprecedented in two senses. Not only what he said and the lecturer way that he said it, not only in the way that when he first began, he said something commiserating the terrorist act that had happened just before, and they applauded him, and he said perspicaciously, "I hope this isn't the last applause that I'm going to get." You know, Putin said the same thing back in 2007 at the beginning of his speech, and they were both right. I still remember Bobby Gates as defense secretary sitting there, and all these guys said, "Who is this upstart?" Well, now we're in a different situation. And the other part of the unprecedented is the fact that the Germans responded very angrily in a way that they usually haven't responded. Now, what happened was their president, a fellow named Steinmeier, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, he's a big politico there for the SPD. He got up and revised the beginning of his speech. Okay, this was just an hour or two later, and he said, "You know, this approach is breaking all the rules. You know, we have these rules, and the behavior is just not consonant with the way people behave. There are entrepreneurial people who are using their power and their will to reverse what we have built, and I have große Sorge. Okay, I have great concern." And then he repeats that again. "I have great concern." 1 minute. But 1 minute, it really matters, because he picked up the gauntlet there, and the Germans openly opposed what Vance said without saying anything about the essence of what he said. The German people know that. The German people know, and I have personal friends that have been risking jail just for saying or writing things, okay? They know which end is up. And the election, again, is just 1 week away. So those were the unprecedented things that I saw with respect to Vance. But I'm not sure did I answer your question, Elizabeth?
Well, I guess my question was more about the media in the US and the way that they've covered all of this and the way that they've described it as, like, let's say, echoing Russian talking points, but they haven't tried to make those really drastic allegations that we saw during Russiagate, like, Putin is controlling Trump and that type of thing. I mean, even just the confirmation of Tulsi Gabbard, we all remember how she was smeared as a Russian asset. I mean, you just haven't seen the hysteria in US media around the Russian connection in the way that we did all of those years ago. And I think to me, that does speak a little bit to the death of Russiagate in the media.
Well, two things on that. Patrick pointed out quite accurately that it still appears as flat fact, as Bob Perry used to say, what they did hacking into still appears in the New York Times and prominent periodicals. And the second thing is it'll raise its head again. I think it's the shock more than anything else. So what are you going to tell? What are you going to tell David Sanger to say now? I mean, he hasn't had a chance to check with his CIA buddies, So I don't know what will happen this coming week, but I expect some not only retrenchment, but I expect some kind of real rabid reaction to what the hell is going on. How could you accuse people of doing the kinds of things that the Russians, the Soviets used to do? My God, that's beyond the pale. What is Vance trying to do? I expect some of that in the coming week.
Yeah, well, Zelensky did say that Trump was going to be manipulated. But you mentioned Frank-Walter Steinmeier, Ray, and I recall writing back in June 2016 for Bob Perry at Security News. It was a time when NATO was doing a 30,000-man exercise across Poland, marching in the direction of Russia, and it was said was the first time German troops had marched in that direction since the Second World War since the invasion of the Soviet Union. And Frank-Walter Steinmeier actually said that what we shouldn't do now is inflame the situation further through saber rattling and warmongering. He told Bild am Sonntag. Whoever believes that a symbolic tank parade on the alliance's eastern border will bring security is mistaken. And then he said, we are well advised to not create pretexts to renew an old confrontation. He said that would be wrong to, it would be fatal to search only for military solutions and a policy of deterrence. So he changed his tune in the last 9 years. He
Well,
was the foreign minister.
yeah, Steinmeier is sort of slippery guy. He's all hat, no cattle.
Yeah,
He couldn't really affect any of the SPD policies. And Joe, by coincidence, you're talking about Operation Anaconda, right? Anaconda. Okay, that's what they call this operation.
Yeah, 2016.
Yeah, I was there. I was in Berlin at the time. Okay.
I see.
And by some fluke, some connections I had, I got an interview for 45 minutes with the head of the Bundestag Ausschuss, the Committee for Armed Services, an SPD guy, okay? And his name was Wolfgang Helmich, okay? Good guy. He gave me some time. He comes in, and the first thing I say is, Helmich, what do you think of this Operation Anaconda that's happening? He said, I don't agree with it, he says. So I said, well, the German troops are participating. Well, no, they're not. Yeah, well, the radio says that it's not a NATO. No, we don't. Okay. The head of the Bundestag Ausschuss Committee for Armed Services saying, no, this is a really lousy job. No, I don't want to be associated with this. What the hell, Helmich, what did he do about it? Nothing. He couldn't say anything. Why? Because the Germans have never grown up, okay? And when I said by Zoom on Marienplatz 2 nights ago, the little talk I gave that Scott mentioned earlier, I said, look, the solution is that the Germans have to act like adults. They have to divorce themselves from the way it's been for the last 80 years. There was great applause. I mean, these were, well, I guess I said that before. So people realize that the Germans, after the war, of course, World War II, had to act like children. When Willy Brandt came in, well, they still had to act like teenagers. Sometimes they were obstreperous. Sometimes they went to Ostpolitik, thinking that it's a good idea to have good relations with Russia, okay? And then they became sort of some grown-ups, but without the grown-ups, Erwachsene, without any real strength behind them. So they're Erwachsene, but only in name, and they need to grow up. And maybe this is a unique opportunity that will force them to say, well, okay, what do we do about the Russians? Oh, the Russians aren't going to invade the rest of Ukraine. Oh, they're not going to invade Poland? Oh, well, maybe we should have business relationships with them again. Maybe we should rebuild those plants that we. So it's really up for grabs in a way that I think Scott has explained pretty well. And it's a new world, and not only in the new world, but in what Rumsfeld disdainfully called old Europe.
What do you mean that Russia's not going to invade the rest of Europe? The New York Times tells us authoritatively, quote, it's the uncertainty of how the negotiation to pull U.S. troops out of Europe will go on and whether Europeans can count on the United States to come to their defense should Russia try to pick off a smaller NATO nation next. This is the kind of rubbish that we read in the paper of record. So I want to end by looking forward to the talks in Saudi Arabia and how you guys think a Ukrainian peace settlement might look like. But before I do that, there are people watching this program that are not necessarily in tune with what our guests are saying, and they might have different views. So I want to just explain briefly why Ray was saying that this was an unprovoked invasion by Russia. of Ukraine, because we have to look back to 2014, where there's abundant evidence that the U.S., including the National Endowment of Democracy, probably USAID, had involvement in overthrowing a democratically elected president of Ukraine in 2014 in an election that had been certified by the OSCE. And some Russian speakers who had voted for Yanukovych, she's the one who was overthrown, they resisted that coup. And in response to that, with American goading, the new Ukrainian coup government went to war against those people, killed up to 12,000 or 14,000 people were killed in that war. There was a Minsk Accord that we found out later was fake. The Europeans and the Americans were never serious about it. And they started a renewed attack against Donbass, was about to come in February 2022, 3 years ago. And Putin put forward a few months before that these treaties to NATO and the US, in which Russia is calling for missiles in Romania and Poland to be removed, and that forward deployments into these new NATO states also be withdrawn. Not that those countries, the Eastern European countries, had to leave NATO, but that they shouldn't have NATO troops deployed on those territories. And if they didn't agree to that, Russia was prepared to use technical military means. Well, what did that mean? Well, the U.S. rejected that pretty much out of hand. They rejected Minsk. They started this war. In 2014, Russia entered the civil war in Ukraine in 2022. This is why it was provoked. And right after the intervention by Russia, we heard Biden in Warsaw saying that this was an operation to overthrow Putin. Of course, they tried to walk that back with Blinken making a ridiculous statement that the U.S. never overthrows any governments. What are you talking about? And Austin said that this purpose was to weaken Russia. This was the whole thing. They didn't give a damn about Ukraine. They don't give a damn about Ukraine, but the Biden administration. This was using Ukraine to get at Russia. I think if anybody with an open mind wants to look at the facts of that, that's the conclusion. They will not believe the myth that this was an unprovoked, evil attack by a dictator who has his eyes on Western Europe, because on the one hand, Biden says the guy is so weak he couldn't take Kherson province, and yet in 2 months he's supposed to be in Paris, with his troops. So it's a ridiculous. He's too weak to take the Donbass, but he's a threat to the rest of Europe. So I want to talk now about
So
Saudi
let me
Arabia.
just add.
Yes, please.
So can I add just something here?
Yeah, of course.
Sometimes people make mistakes in what they say. And we had a fellow named Jens Stoltenberg who was addressing a formal meeting of the EU on the 7th of September, 2023. And he said, the Russians don't want NATO expansion. They gave us a treaty, no expansion into Ukraine. This is a precondition for us not to invade Ukraine, the Russians said. So we rejected that, and the Russians went into Ukraine. But meanwhile, we got Sweden and we got Finland. So NATO expanded. Ha, 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 ha. Doesn't matter that 1 million Ukrainians and Russian troops are dead because. So this is the kind of leadership, just a good example of what kind of leadership you have at NATO. And he was bragging about how, that we rejected that. Well, and there's one other thing people need to know. Nobody knows this. But when Putin told his top military on the 21st of December, 2021, that America was going to put hypersonic missiles in Ukraine as soon as they finally figured out how to make them. Okay, there was a uproar among the Russian military. So we can't. That would be 5 minutes time. Okay, 5 minutes time from launch to target. We have to get something better than that. You have to get a personal commitment. So. Next thing you know, 10 days later, on the 30th of December, 2021, the White House gets a call from the Kremlin. Mr. Putin would like to talk to Mr. Biden, and right away. Why? They just talked 2 weeks ago. We got the negotiations set up in Geneva. Please. He'd like to talk to. Okay, tomorrow. Okay, Biden is in Delaware. His advisors are not there. To his credit, he takes the call, and Putin extracts a promise from him. And the readout says, Mr. Biden said, the U.S. has no intention of putting offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. Okay. So great rejoicing in the Kremlin and in all of Russia because Ushakov, Putin's man, told about this deal. It fulfilled fully 4 of the major principles that they were asking for in this treaty, or touched on them. Okay. So what happens? They go to Geneva, and the negotiating team, what was her name, the person who headed up that? She said, we don't have any instructions on that. And finally, Lavrov braces Blinken in Geneva on the 21st of January 2022 now, and said, hey, what about that undertaking that Mr. Biden took on the phone there with Mr. Putin? And Blinken says, forget about it. He was alone. He was in Delaware. We have every right to put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine, and we'll do it. If they ask us to, we might be able to talk about how many. So Lavrov, on the 21st of January, knew that they had been had once again, not only Minsk twice, but now this. And it was just 10 days later that Putin appeared in Beijing to launch the Winter Olympics, told Xi Jinping what the situation was, and got his nihil obstat, got his acquiescence in breaking China's fundamental rule under Westphalia not to do the kinds of things that Putin said he would do, and got agreement so long as he didn't do it during the Olympics. The Olympics changed. The Olympics finished on the 20th of February, and we don't know what happened 3 or 4 days later. So it's a complicated thing, but all I'm saying here to buttress what you just said, Joe, is it's not people's fault that they don't know this. How many know about that promise that Biden made? Very, very few people. Maybe many academics haven't taken it into account, but that was the last straw in many ways. And when Putin had Xi Jinping backing him up as a big brother, well, he had confidence to do what he has done. And now, as Scott has pointed out, he's all but won. And those are the cards that Putin has 4 aces. Trump has a pair of deuces. I think Trump knows that. I think we'll be out of this pretty soon.
Well, that's a good lead into what we can expect in Saudi Arabia this week. The Secretary of State Rubio's going. The National Security Advisor Waltz is going. There's no Kellogg, and there's no Zelensky or anyone from Kiev, and nobody from Europe. And they're, of course, crying bloody murder. Zelensky is saying there will be no deal without me. Now, I understand that the Paris peace talks in Vietnam were between the United States and the North Vietnamese, and the South Vietnamese were not there. Is that right? Right.
Right.
So the same
That's
thing.
right.
Client state of Ukraine is not going to be there. This is a deal between the United States and Russia. That's because the U.S. was behind this war all along. So all of a sudden, Zelensky, who was just a puppet, thinks he's a big guy right now. Tell me something, Scott. What do you expect to happen there? Russia said they won't allow him to sign it because he's not the president anymore by the Constitution of Ukraine. His term is passed, even though Blinken gave him dispensation and said it's okay. He's not the president legally of Ukraine. So what do you think is going to happen this week? And what kind of a deal will we see eventually do you envision happening to end the war in Ukraine?
Well, let's just, again, set it up. We'll reverse engineer this from the Russian side. The Russians aren't going to engage in superficiality. Okay, they've made that clear from the start. The Biden administration has been seeking to have diplomatic, interactions with Russia for some time, and the Russians say, "You're not serious. We're not going to meet for meeting's sake." And the other thing about the Russians is their standard for sealing the deal is much higher today. The level of commitments in writing, etc., are beyond anything in the past because they don't trust the United States anymore. They've made that clear. Even Peskov came in and said there will be no Minsk III. We're not going down this path again. And yet the Russians are agreeing to a meeting that has Lavrov, Ushakov, and again, Ray can back me up, but Ushakov is the heaviest of heavy hitters when it comes to U.S.-Russian relations. Former ambassador, he's the man that is right next to Vladimir Putin. Anytime anything about America is whispered, he comes in and sets the record straight. The head of the Russian intelligence services are there. What's important there is that he has been the guy leading the back channel with Burns, the former director of the CIA. So he is. The fact that the Russians have done this tells me there is already a deal done. Russia isn't going there to negotiate in broad terms a deal. Russia is going to bring closure on a deal that already exists. And now we go to this. That deal would not exist unless the United States has been in contact with the Russians and has been working the issue with the Russians with serious people that the Russians respect.
Like
And I
Witkoff,
come back-
sorry to interrupt you. Witkoff, I forgot to mention, he'll be there. The
Witkoff,
Middle East negotiator. He went to Moscow. Yeah.
Yeah, he's new in the arena, but the thing is, he has the ear of Trump. He is by an extension of Trump, not controlled by the establishment. When he speaks, he's not tainted by State Department prejudice, Department of Defense prejudice, CIA prejudice. He is purely a real estate guy that Donald Trump has entrusted with saving the world, which and the Russians can respect that. But the fact that Rubio and Lavrov spent so much time talking about undoing the harm of 2016, again, tells me that Trump is receiving the best possible advice from people who are in the know. And that what's going to happen when Rubio and Lavrov sit down isn't going to be, let's point to Ukraine on a map. It's going to be, all right, pull out, okay, we're agreeing to this. We get initials on them. Good. Let's flip the page over. We have, disagreements on this. What do you got? We got this. We got that. We got this. Boom, boom, sign off. Boom. There's a deal already done. That's what this tells me. And the other reason is there is going to be a Putin-Trump summit in Riyadh. That is going to happen this month. Just think what I'm saying. The president of the United States and the president of Russia are going to meet in Riyadh this month. They haven't totally committed to that, but the reason why I bring that up is this meeting between Rubio and Lavrov isn't meant to last a long time. This isn't going to be dragged out. They have until the end of the month to come up with a document that's ready for signature. An interim peace plan signed by two presidents, locking them in. This is how fast this is going. This is the rapidity of action here. And Saudi Arabia is a key player here because, again, Saudi Arabia, the United States continues to rely upon Saudi Arabia on energy security policy. They are the accelerator of oil production. They can increase volume, decrease based upon the needs of the United States to control prices. But Saudi Arabia, a couple of years ago, allowed Russia to come into the OPEC plus formulation. And so today, the number one influence on Saudi Arabia in terms of energy security is not the United States, but Russia. Saudi Arabia is literally best place to be, not just the facilitator of discussions, but the moderator and mediator because a key aspect to the United States and Russia here in their strategic relationship is energy security. If you're going to be talking about the lifting of sanctions, if you're going to be talking about this, the United States needs some guarantees regarding stability of the international oil market for prices. And so this is going to be a big factor of this. in fact, the energy security aspects of this may take more of the time than the bringing into the Ukraine conflict aspects of this. The Russians know what they want. The United States knows what the Russians want. Ukraine doesn't have a vote. The European Union doesn't have a vote. This is as simple as it gets. Russia and the United States make an agreement. That will be the agreement. The United States will dictate the agreement to Ukraine and dictate the agreement to the Europeans, and they have no say in this whatsoever. They can do nothing to upset this, because if they do, that will be the end of NATO and the European Union instantaneously. I think this is a done deal. I'm expecting that Rubio and Lavrov will come out of this with the a completed agreement. It'll be an interim agreement. I think there will be some follow-on stuff to be done, but because Putin and Trump aren't getting together just to shake hands and French kiss in front of TV. They're going to come in and they're going to sign a document. They're going to sign a document that has substance, sign a document that has legal weight, sign a document that will get Europe and Ukraine to take it to the final step. And this won't be a treaty that needs Senate ratification. This is going to be, an executive agreement. But then we are going to be moving to treaties. Once we get past this, once we bring this conflict to an end, we are moving in the direction of treaties. And this is where Joe and Ray, you both have brought up the December 17, 2021 draft treaties that Russia put on the table for NATO and the United States. The Russians didn't go through all that work just to throw those away. Those treaties have been updated, they have been shared, and those treaties will serve as the basis for the final agreements that will be signed in ceremonies that could take place in May of 2025. I mean, that soon. I think we've got a big day coming up called May 9th. That's Victory Day. And I think the symbology of the United States and Russia side by side as allies celebrating the defeat of Nazi Germany is something that Donald Trump, who is the expert of symbology, hell, didn't he just use his car to be the pace car in the big NASCAR race? I mean, the guy knows what he's doing. I just think that this is not going to be an exercise in futility. This is not going to be a Biden administration, I was going to use a bad terminology, Biden administration game with the Russians. I think that they have literally, this deal has already been framed out. They're going to go in and they're going to work through the final parts of it. The biggest part will be about energy security, because you can't just unleash the Russian oil on the global economy. There has to be a way that does it that's not disruptive to American oil producers and things of that nature. But the Ukraine thing, I think it's going to be an agreement that will please the Russians. And I think there will also be caveats built into it, that if Ukraine, meaning that if everybody agrees, then it'll be this, but if they don't agree, then we go to subparagraph 3.3 that says that Russia does this, and on and on and on. The reason why I say this is I just can't imagine Lavrov, having talked to the Russians over the course of the last 2 years at some very high levels. I just can't imagine the Russians dispatching a delegation of this weight, of this gravitas, just to play games. For the Russians to agree to this, I think they have set forth their conditions. I think the United States has made it clear we understand their conditions and that we are receptive to their conditions. And I expect a whole bunch of good things to come out of Riyadh.
They might celebrate the defeat of German Nazis on May 9th, but what about the Ukrainian Nazis? That's a big part of what the Russians went to war for in Ukraine, which is to denazify, and they were a significant part of this revolt and this war. They did not have domination over the politics of Ukraine. They had a very small presence in the parliament. That's the thing you keep hearing. But they had extra parliamentary power, and they then became incorporated into the National Guard of Ukraine. Will this deal, and you don't know, obviously, you haven't seen it, you can only speculate, but what will be in this deal? Will there be some way to denazify the country and demilitarize Ukraine? We know neutrality is going to be in there, but and also the territorial. I'm asking you a bunch of things. Territory, what is it going to be? The Dnieper River? Will they have some control over Odessa, the Russians? What do you think that's going to look like as well?
Again, you know, I think the Russians understand a couple things too, that this can't be a one-way street. This can't be about Russia getting everything at once and Trump looking like a dupe. So I think that there is room for compromise here, but there's some things that cannot be compromised for. On the territory, I think those Russians who are hoping that Odessa and Kharkov join Novorossiya will be disappointed. There is even a possibility that Russia may give up the right bank of Kherson, which is very difficult constitutionally because it is part of Mother Russia legally, and this would require the part. But when I think of the so-called hard compromises that Pete Hegseth has hinted on, that's the easiest of the hard compromises. But Russia will get the vast majority of the territories that belong to Novorossiya. Demilitarization will take place. There's no doubt about that. There will not be a NATO military in Ukraine. Trump has already said that NATO expansion is the problem. I think the key to denazification comes in the form of elections. And Trump has dropped some very important hints here. Basically, it says that Zelensky isn't the legal president of Ukraine, that there need to be elections. He's very down in the polls, and he may not do well in the elections. Well, he's not. He's out. And I think that the Russians are going to be pushing for elections that get the right people in the right positions. That will create the conditions for constitutional changes that need to take place to nullify the legality of these far right parties. But then the big question is, what do you do about Western Ukraine? What do you do about Lvov? What do you do about, the heart of the devil? This is where banderism resides. And here's where we get into massive speculation. But I do think that a realistic solution to this, and it's something that Russians have been hinting about, is an agreement for Western Ukraine to be ceded to the Poles, to allow Hungarians to take Carpathia, to allow Romanians to take parts of Ruthenia, or the Romanians take the Slovaks to get Ruthenia. The Russians have been engaged in this conversation. And I think that some of the leverage that the United States holds over Ukraine and Europe is you buy onto this, or we go to, because we're not bad. I mean, Donald Trump's going to come to the Europeans and say, this is a done deal. You weren't at the table for a reason, because you don't matter. This is a done deal. Now, what we'd like from you is your concurrence, and then we want you to do the following, like put a lot of money up into reconstruction, etc. And when Europe balks, he says, well, I want to refer you to Annex 4, subparagraph 3C, that says we now will implement the following. And is that what you want? And I think these terms, this is going to be a dictation to Europe. This isn't about so much Ukraine surrendering, but Europe surrendering, which is one of the reasons why J.D. Vance did what he did. He threw Europe off of its game. Europe is in total disarray, and Europe cannot speak with a single voice now. And this is the perfect time. Remember, Donald Trump is a negotiator. He's a New York State real estate negotiator. And his job when you come to the table is to have screwed you up so badly. You think you have financing to support your deal, and he's come in and he's taken your banks away from you. He's got the FCC to investigate this, that, and you're frozen. Your credit card doesn't work. Your kids have been kicked out of college, and now you're supposed to come down at the table and you think you have a deal, but you don't. And he says, I need you to sign this deal, and all those problems go away. And they're going to sign the deal. That's the way Donald Trump thinks. That's the way he works. And I think what we're seeing here is the geopolitical application of dirty New York real estate negotiating tactics.
The Roy Cohn School of Negotiation. Ray McGovern.
Not very
Yes,
American. I'm not saying I'm proud of this. I mean, I'm not sitting there saying, this is the America that I grew up believing in, but I am saying that the alternative is nuclear war, literally. And when I put those on the table, and I also recognize the failure of multiple administrations to do the right thing, to behave properly. And then I'll leave it at this. The Russians don't play the New York State real estate game in the long term. All right. And what the Russians are looking for is long-term stability, normalization, to do things in the right way. And so I think the Russians are going to allow Trump. This is a wonderful opportunity for it. Just think again, Joe, let's just ponder this for a second. They're going to get rid of NATO for free. The Russians aren't going to have to do anything, and they're getting rid of NATO. So now if I'm sitting there talking to Putin, and all the speculation, well, what do we do if this, that, and the other thing? What do we do about the American missile bases and this, that, and the other thing? Give Trump a couple months and NATO goes away. What do we do about the European Union as an economic counterpiece to this? Give Trump a couple months and the European Union dissolves. Boss, we don't have to do a damn thing except make this agreement happen. And then Trump's going to do all the work to destroy Europe and NATO. And we have the stability that we've been looking for. And then all we have to do is work with the Americans the way we always wanted to work with the Americans, in peace and harmony, business relationship. Again, having the Saudis being the mediators and moderators of this meeting means everything, because what's the biggest business in Russia? Energy. What's one of the biggest businesses in America? Energy. And to have Russia and the United States making their energy security policies mesh is it's like fine tuning everything before the orchestra plays. I think that this, and again, I also have to say this, they have to act fast, Joe. They can't give Mickey Mac, or whatever the hell we're calling it, Mick Mac. They can't give the establishment, they can't give anybody a chance to catch their feet. JD Vance went in there and just screwed Europe all up. And Europe right now is falling over. They don't know what the hell. In America, they're going USAID. We don't know what's going on. Everybody's running around. And Trump's going to go, bam, finish treaty. And they're going to go, how the hell did you do that? What do we do? And they're trying to organize. And then he's going to move on to the next thing. And then he's going to keep them off balance. The fatal mistake that Trump makes is if he goes, well, we got to pause now for 180 days. And and Kellogg's just one big giant deception operation. Because he went from 100 days, now he has 180-day thing. And who's he talking to? Lindsey Graham, Tom Cotton. So all the potential people, the Russophobes out there, they're all like, yeah, well, that's okay. Kellogg said 180 days. Don't worry. Trump's not going to do it. And they're, okay, let's all get together, guys. How can we screw this thing up? How can we finish treaty? How the hell did that happen? Where'd that come from? Can we respond? We don't. No. Well, and then Tom Cotton's going, holy shit, I got FBI agents in my office and they're asking about the conversation I had with Lockheed Martin 3 years ago that brought it. Oh no, I'm in trouble here. I might be in corruption problems. The last thing he's worried now about Russia, he's worried about not going to jail. Trump owns these people. He has Kash Patel, as Ray McGovern said, has broken the code on everything. And when Trump says, I need to silence Tom Cotton, Kash Patel picks up and says, execute Lockheed Martin Plan Alpha 3002. And the FBI comes swinging in, and 3 Lockheed Martin guys come out with a file that says Tom Cotton met with this person on this day. And Tom Cotton's now sitting there going, oh, what do I do? And we know they want to cut a deal. They're the deal they're cutting with Adams, the New York City mayor. Guilty as hell. But they say, hey, you want to make these felonies disappear? Play games, let ICE do what they want to do in the biggest city in America. And the mayor's going, yep, I'm all on board for that. And the end result is the Southern District of New York, which could have been a big impediment, no longer exists. It is gone. It is finished. And the idiots that backed them up in the Department of Justice, they are gone. And all the FBI agents that thought they were going to put handcuffs on, they are gone. It's been purged. It's a purge. It's a revolution. It's beautiful. I feel like Dennis Hopper, when he meets Martin Sheen's character in Apocalypse Now, when he comes off the boat, you're looking at the sanity, and Hopper's like, his mind works in a different way, man. He's like out there, man. I mean, it's beautiful what he's doing, man. This is how I feel describing Donald Trump, because it's insane. You got headhunters right there hanging up the dead bodies of people that shouldn't be killed. And you got a crazy guy going nuts. But it's beautiful, man, because it had to happen. Because otherwise, we were all going to die in a thermonuclear war this summer. Again, Ray, I got to let you in here, but I'm just going to finish. When the history is written about what happened from September to November of last year, and we find out how close we came to a real nuclear war between the United States and Russia, and I know how close we came to a real nuclear war between the United States and Russia. This is why I'm so thrilled about what's going on, Joe. I'm not thrilled because it represents the America that I grew up believing in. I'm not thrilled because it represents constitutionality. I'm thrilled because I'm going to live. This is a man who now recognizes that I get to live, that my family gets to live, my friends get to live, that we can work for a better future. That was going to die if Kamala Harris was president, or if Donald Trump didn't follow through. I didn't know he was going to do this. This was a hope and a prayer on my part when I voted for him. And I'm watching it happen. And now I am Dennis Hopper. It's beautiful, man. It's beautiful. His mind works in ways we can't even begin to understand. It's like a movie.
Well, Ray, Scott, rather, I was on Capitol Hill with you that day when you went into those offices, and surprising, a lot of members of the House were receptive to what you were saying. So what you're saying is we may wind up with peace from Lisbon to Vladivostok. Wasn't that the dream in 1992? And was postponed, a peace dividend postponed. My last question to you before I go to Ray is, when you said the water was thrown on the witch, is the witch's name Ursula von der Leyen?
I think what we need to understand is that the European Union has no power and never has had any power. And they've taken far too much ink and far too much air. The proof of that, do you remember when Ursula followed Olaf Scholz into China? Olaf Scholz, remember, the Europeans got together and went, we can't call it delinking, so we'll call it de-risking. But we need you to go in there and de-risk. Well, what does that mean? Well, you got to de-link from the Chinese companies. And Scholz went, and so he brought in his automobile guys, and one of them was the Volkswagen guy. And Scholz went in there and talked about de-linking. The Volkswagen guy went, "Hey, boss, we are a global corporation. The only place in the world that we make money is China. And if you de-risk, we collapse. It's over. It's finished. We're done." And so Scholz started talking. Well, Ursula followed through because she was there to make sure that Olaf Scholz followed through with de-risking, because that was what the Europeans said, and they are very powerful and influential. The Chinese wouldn't even see her. They kicked her out, put her on economy class when they didn't even give her the diplomatic niceties. She doesn't count. She doesn't do anything. She has no power. She has no influence. The same thing with Kallas, this Estonian warlord wannabe. She speaks, and unfortunately, the Western media parrots her, but she has no power. She can move no divisions. She can move nothing. She can make nothing happen. They aren't the wicked witch is, frankly speaking, NATO, because that's the glue that holds all this thing together. So, when Trump says he's pulling the troops out, and that's it. And then when that happens, you'll see that this edifice we call the European Union collapses. And the biggest part of that will be Germany. This is what makes AfD dangerous, because one of their top policy initiatives is to withdraw from the European Union. And when they withdraw from the European Union, take the German bank out of the European Union. There's 3 banks to make the European Union work: The French bank, the German bank, the Italian bank. But only one bank makes the European Union work. That's the one that they all turned to save Greece. You remember that, the big Greece crisis a couple years ago? There was only one bank that mattered, and that was the German bank, and they were the ones that had to take action to save Europe. And when Germany pulls the German bank out of the European banking system, ding dong, the witch is dead, the wicked witch, the wicked witch. I mean, it's going to be beautiful. I am going to be just so happy because then Europe becomes Europe again. And Trump has said, I'm not dealing with the European Union anymore. I'm only dealing with individual nation states. Perfect.
Ray, what do you think is going to happen in Saudi Arabia next week?
Well, I hope that Scott is right, and I hate to play the skunk at the picnic, but let me cite some of the things that militate against a quick agreement. First, the good news is that the French and the Germans, who were supposed to monitor Minsk 1 and 2, are not in the play, and neither is Zelensky. So it's a one-on-one situation. Lavrov will be acute and be fully empowered to deal. Question is trust. It's going to be a big leap for the Russians to trust any president, especially presidents that only have 4 years. Okay, what happens after 4 years? The Russians have been really, really acrid in criticizing and putting faith into signed documents. So what happened to the ABM Treaty of 1972? What happened to the INF Treaty of 1987? What happened to Open Skies Treaty? They were all written down, weren't they? Okay, what happened? So there's a history here that Putin himself has got to be sensitive to, because military is looking over his shoulder, just as ours always is, and say, wait a second, they may promise this. They may even implement it for a couple of years, but a new president then will revoke this or could. So those are the things that I see militating against a quick resolution to any of this. And there are ways with acute people, smart people, to do the necessary mechanisms, and Scott knows this far better than I, to proverei no proverei, okay, trust but verify. So that INF treatment that you, Scott, were first gone to the ground to verify, you had very specific parameters that you could go by and you could cite, right? It's going to be a major deal to figure out what to do about Western Ukraine, for example, how to really get rid of the Nazis, even if there are elections, and not least, when we talk about the deep state, we're also talking about security forces that have stayed behind operations in what will become the Russian part of Ukraine. And there'll be all kinds of people really, really eager to do what they do best, cause trouble to our Russians, and then maybe come from Western Ukraine. So all I'm saying is that I think you're right. He has to move quickly before all these impediments come in. But at the same time, I think the Russians are going to be really chary of trusting, because trust is gone. Maybe they can trust Trump. Trust Trump. That's interesting. Yeah, maybe they can trust Trump, but they're going to need more than a signature on the bottom line. There'll be kind of really intrusive verification procedures that will be necessary, and I think that's going to take several months. That's my guess. All of this is hypothetical guesswork, but I'm not very far from where Scott is. I just think it's going to take a much longer time, and I hope that the Russians can trust, whereas they not able to trust the last couple presidents.
I'm just going to say I don't disagree with anything Ray said, except to point out the following. Okay, let's just imagine we're in the Kremlin now. Okay, and you're Putin, and you've got Lavrov and you've got Gerasimov, and they said just that. We can't trust the Americans. You know that, Mr. President. They withdraw from treaties. Trump's out here saying things, but we can't trust them, and it's going to take a long time to get these treaties up and all that kind of stuff. Then Ushakov comes up and says, we have a chance right now to get rid of NATO and the European Union free of charge. If you sit here and play stupid games, NATO will get up on its feet and survive for the next 10 years, causing us endless headaches. European Union will set up, and what we'll end up with is an agreement that will never be implemented, and we're not going to solve the Ukraine issue. We have to take a gamble, Mr. President, because this gamble here, if it wins, and I think right now we have all the odds in our favor, we need to let Trump kill NATO, kill the European Union. Now, we're not making that a condition. He would never go for that. But I'm telling you right now, let this play out. And we have to do it in a way we have to sustain it. We can't have any gap here. We're meeting in Riyadh. We need momentum coming out of Riyadh. We need to keep. He has knocked everything into disarray. We must keep that disarray moving, Mr. President, because the moment we get any stability, then they coalesce against us and it comes to a halt. We have to keep it fluid. And then the head of the Russian intelligence service steps up and says, I'm with Ushakov. We could spend $14 trillion over the course of the next 20 years and never have a better opportunity than right now to kill NATO and kill the European Union, two of our greatest threats. And it won't cost us a dime. We're not asking for the completed treaty. We just need a framework coming out of Riyadh that allows Trump to be disruptive to NATO, disruptive to the European Union. We just need something, Mr. President, and we need you to meet with him. We need you to meet with him, Mr. President. You must go to Riyadh and meet with him, Mr. President, to seal this deal. And then if I were Lavrov, I would also throw in and say, Mr. President, I support this now because of the following. When we speak of a 4-year, first of all, let's talk about Ronald Reagan, the man who brought so much change. We didn't get to have a meaningful dialogue with Reagan on arms control till after his first term. So let's stop talking about just a one-term president. And then when Reagan came in, it took us almost to the end of his term to reach finality on agreements. Donald Trump is 3 weeks into his presidency, and we can have a freaking agreement that changes the world right off the bat. And then we got 3+ years to work with this guy to fix it. This is the best opportunity we've had with any American president to get an agreement in early, then spend 3 years solidifying it. Because normally we get the agreement at the end, and then another president comes in and screws it up. And Putin will sit there and go, yeah, make the meeting, get the meeting, let's get it done, and let's win. This has victory written all over. There's no downside for the Russians on this one.
Well, you haven't mentioned Gerasimov. In other words, you mentioned him in the beginning. What's he going to say? He's going to say, look, Mr. President, I don't know about this. Let me check with my other chiefs of staff and so forth. And there's a really bad history, Mr. President. And I tell you what, if you make part of the deal the reverse of Scholz's promise to put in medium-range ballistic missiles in Germany next year, if you make that part of the deal, I can persuade my Navy and Marines and all my other officers to go along with it. But we need something concrete here. You persuade them to do that. We're on there. We'll chop off on this. I see most of my colleagues say it's a good idea.
Ray, I think Gerasimov is going to say something different. I think he's going to say, Mr. Putin, you're going to be in an agreement-hungry mode, and I respect that. I think we need to bring it into this conflict. Our Russian boys deserve to come home. They're heroes. They've done it. We need to bring it into this fighting. But Mr. President, we didn't deploy Oreshnik for nothing. We have the Oreshnik. Okay, we have the trump card over anything they want to do in Europe. Do not take that away from us, Mr. President. Do not give in to any American demands about arms control in Europe. We own them. We have the Oreshnik right now. If they deploy Dark Eagle, we can kill it in a heartbeat. Do not take this away from us, Mr. President. Do not agree to an agreement where they don't deploy Dark Eagle and we have to withdraw Oreshnik. Keep the Oreshnik, Mr. President. Keep the Oreshnik. That's what I think Gerasimov is going to be saying. I don't think he's going to be saying, oh, don't do this. I think he's going to say, we have an advantage here. Don't negotiate it away, Mr. President. And you know what's going to happen? It's going to get negotiated away and it's going to piss Gerasimov right off because they always lose in these agreements. They always lose. But I do think, one thing we haven't talked about, and I think will be on the table, is I think New START is going to be extended. And this will be a good thing. I think it's going to be one of the first concrete things that'll happen. And that may happen. That may be one of the things that Trump and Putin sign off on, which is an extension of New START, because it literally doesn't require anything. Putin has to go to the parliament, but the parliament will, of course, agree to it. Trump doesn't have to do anything. This is an executive decision. Doesn't have to get Senate clearance on this. And what it does is it ends the arms race. Instantly ends the arms race. And now they can get down to the business of real arms control. But Anatoly Antonov said there could be no real arms control until the United States reverses its policy on the strategic defeat of Russia. Trump is doing that right now. He's demonstrating that. And you asked the question about the stay behind people. I have a response to that too. Tulsi Gabbard. You think Tulsi is going to sit there and let the Russian Mission Center continue to play stupid games? Gina Haspel went in and tried to get the Russian Mission Center to stop playing stupid games. And she was a very influential, powerful director of the CIA. Hell, she ran torture camps. You can't mess with Gina. She'd torture you to death and make it disappear. That's who Gina Haspel was. She was one mean lady. And she went in and tried to play games with the Russians, and they said, get the hell out of here because they're deeply entrenched. And the Russia House does what the Russia House wants to do. And Moscow does what Moscow wants to do. And the rest of you can just go to hell. And Tulsi Gabbard is going to come in and go, you're fired, 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 you're fired. There's going to be a new song she's going to write called You're Fired. And she's going to fire them all because there's no consequence to be paid, because half of them are going to be arrested anyways because they have broken the law in terms of working with the FBI to go against Donald Trump. And there goes your stay behinds. See, Tulsi's an honest person. See, she doesn't come from the CIA. She doesn't come from an organ, most of these people that come in to be directors of the CIA are people that are drinking with these guys, and they all know where the bodies are hidden. They all have secrets to hide, and they all are chums and alcoholics and whoremongers. And Tulsi's going to come in, and she's not. And the president says, we need to clean up this thing. And, yes, sir, because she's a good soldier. And she's going to turn to the CIA, and she's going to gut it. Absolutely gut the Russia House, which will be the best thing possible. And then she's going to hire new analysts whose job isn't to carry out secret covert operations, stay behind to bring down Russia, but how to improve. The new mission statement is, how do we improve and sustain our strategic relationship with the Russians? That's your mission. And you fire everybody who wrote a PhD thesis on Vladimir Putin is the most evil man on the planet. Because that's what we have today. Everybody in the intelligence community has written a thesis. I've researched it. It's the same damn argument. Vladimir Putin is the most evil man on the planet, and the United States must get rid of him. Fire these people and hire the thinkers that say, hey, maybe we should learn to work with the Russians. And if we come together with some sort of strategic, boom, 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 and that's the new CIA. And that takes care of that problem. This is a revolution. He didn't put Tulsi Gabbard in there just to pour coffee. Her job is to be revolutionary in every way, shape, or form, to destroy this intelligence community that nobody controls. They do what they want to do. So I think that I think we're looking at a brave new world here. And I hope Donald Trump can pull it off. But I would also say this, the fact that the Russians are leaning forward so aggressively tells me that they know things that we don't know, meaning that they've talked to people who are serious. They've had discussions. I think Lavrov would not be showing up at this stage of the negotiations with Ushakov and the head of the SVR unless a deal was done. That's my personal belief. Knowing the Russians the way I know them, that's not how they negotiate. They don't bring in their big guns up front. You have to go on a walk in the woods first. You got to have Nietzsche talk with this guy. You got to have another guy talk with this guy. That's all happened. Keith Kellogg has been running interference for 3 weeks, making the whole world believe that Donald Trump had me believing it too, was going to, bring oil down to $45 a barrel to break the Russian economy. And he was going to put troops. There's going to be 100,000 European troops in there. And we're going to do this and we're going to do that. We're going to do this and we're going to do that. And I'm getting all pissed off. And meanwhile, Donald Trump has a team B over here that we don't know anything about, reaching out to the Russians, and they've made a deal. Because this meeting wouldn't happen unless a deal was already made. The Russians would not be committing this high level of a delegation to initiate a negotiation. The negotiation's been underway. These guys are going in to close the deal. That's my belief. And I believe that they know they have to get it done to keep the disruption, to take advantage of the disruption. This is a plan. J.D. Vance went in and threw the hornet's nest into Europe. So the Europeans right now are running around not to get stung. And while they're doing that, we're going to Riyadh to cut a deal. It's genius. I mean, it's genius, but it doesn't work if we let them clean up the hornets, get down, and we still haven't finished the deal. Because now they get to throw obstacles in the way. And Donald Trump isn't about to, he did this for 4 years. He learned every lesson you could possibly learn about how the establishment can screw you. That's why he's cleaning house. He's removing all the impediments. There will be no Department of Justice interference because there isn't a Department of Justice anymore. There won't be any. It's done. And there's literally no resistance because we've become a virtual dictatorship here in the United States. And now we've gone in and disrupted Europe. And I think we're going to have a deal. And again, I'm happy about it because the alternative was a nuclear war. And no matter how bad this is, am I happy that the Constitution's being, hell, we weren't living by the Constitution anyways. 40 FBI agents came through my door because the United States government disregarded the Constitution and decided that free speech was something that they were going to criminalize. And they brought 40 agents through my house to shut me up. For what crime? Trying to stop a nuclear war with Russia. For trying to encourage what's happening today. Maybe that's why I'm happy. Because I finally see that everything that I was trying to do, that we were trying to do, we have a chance to get it done now. Anyways, that's just where I'm at.
Well, yeah. Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If you
Okay.
would like.
Yeah.
So does
Scott, do you have your papers back? Have they given you back all those things that they took from your house, those 40 guys and gals?
Nope, but I wrote a long letter to Pam Bondi, making the request that happens. And my understanding is that my letter will be acted on and that there will be a outcome that's positive to me and negative for the bastards that dare come into my house.
Mm-hmm. How long ago did you write that letter?
Last week.
Okay. Well, let's hope. I think everything you're saying is very hopeful, and I'm with you in terms of the hope. All I'm trying to say is that there are really strong obstacles in the way. Putin himself has complained, I get a new president. I've served 3 presidents now, and they all say really nice things. And then the men with the briefcases and the dark glasses and the suits, like I'm wearing now, says Putin, they come in and everything changes. Now, I'm hopeful earlier is onto that game and won't play games with the likes of the head of the FBI, James Comey, and all those kinds of people. He'll fire him, like you suggest. But I'm not sure he can. It's
He already
deep,
did.
okay?
He already fired.
Well, yeah. Well, all right. I'm not sure
There's
he
no men
can
in
go
dark
deep
suits
enough.
anymore.
I'm
There's
not
no
sure
men in
he
dark suits.
can. People hear me because my earplugs have just gone out. Okay. Well, all I'm saying here is that, as I said on a program last week, my advice to Kash Patel and the new DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, is to have lunch right away, okay? And figure out how they're going to do this, okay? And make sure that they have tasters to taste the food before they eat it. I would suggest that Trump do the same. And I wish I was saying this in jest. There are big stakes at play here. I don't know if they're going to be able to bring it off. I'm hopeful, as you are, Scott, that they will, but we'll have to see. And there are not only the usual impediments, but there are the lunch plates as well. I wouldn't even rule that out. So, for what it's worth, yeah, it's been a terrific week. Joe, thanks for having this discussion here. I've learned a lot, as I always do, from such discussions, and let's hold our fingers and hope that Scott is right about all these things.
There was one other person who tried to break it into 1,000 pieces, like Tulsi's trying to do to the international community. And unfortunately, we know what happened to him. I want to end this by saying thank you to both of you. This is I think Scott has, I was toying with the idea this is a revolution. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind anymore. It's a second American Revolution, but maybe we need a third. And that when this is all said and done, if it is, that he may turn his attention finally to telling Miriam Adelson to go take a hike and to change his policy and to stop screwing around talking about transferring 2 million people to another place. But they're continuing with that. They're threatening now directly to Egypt to take the military aid away from them, which may not be that easy for them to replace. People tell me the Saudis might do it. I don't know. Saudi Arabia cut back on their donations to Egypt recently. Will they say we'll go to China and Russia if you don't give us the money? But I just want to have a couple of words from you about, can you expect Trump to do something about the Middle East, or is that going to remain as horrible as it's been through previous presidents, and Biden as well, of course, who
Well,
instigated it? Yes.
there's one little thing that's hopeful, and that is the readout from the talk between Rubio and Lavrov talked
Yeah.
about them discussing regional issues and specifically South Asia and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
if they're doing that, then there'll be some wise counsel, I would suggest, from Lavrov and from others. And I think there's a ray of hope there, because I think even Trump can be persuaded that he doesn't have to bow to the Adelsons anymore. And it just makes realpolitik and
Yeah.
good sense not to support the genocide. Let's not blanch before the word, the genocide in Gaza.
Well, Ray, you are a ray of hope, Ray. I hope that what you're saying is correct. I think they're going to discuss that in Riyadh, aren't they? With Mohammed bin Salman there, who was saying he's not going to recognize Israel unless there's this Palestinian state, which means never, probably. So maybe that comes up in Riyadh, and as you're saying, they could talk some sense. Lavrov and bin Salman talk some sense into Rubio on this. Scott?
Can I interject here?
Yes, your last word from you.
Oh gosh. Well, I don't know, because generally when I speak, everybody wants to jump in and
All right, we'll make an
so
exception.
let's make it the interim last word, the hopefully last word, if everybody agrees with me.
Yeah.
If not, I'm ready to have it out.
The penultimate last word. Go on.
Donald Trump said that he wanted to bring peace to the Middle East. That's a strategic objective. And he also said he wanted to bring an end to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Now, how do you do that? Do you revert to past practice? Do you continue to fund UNRWA, which then while it can provide humanitarian aid to it, all it does is continue the reality that Gaza is an open-air concentration camp. Because if you fund UNRWA, then you legitimize the continuation of COGAT, which was the Israeli military occupation mechanism in place. So did he do that? No. What was the other alternative? To turn Gaza over to the Israelis and say that we're going to let the Israelis come in and just finish the job, get rid of all these people, and turn it into Jared Kushner's version of Israeli real estate on the thing. Did he do that? Nope. What did he do? Something revolutionary. He said, America owns this. He says, I own Gaza. And he said, now that I own it, I'm going to get rid of all these pesky Palestinians. I'm going to kick them the hell out. And I'm going to turn this thing over. And I'm going to do that in Egypt and Jordan. You're going to make this happen with me. And the Egyptians and Jordans said, no, we can't. We'll die if we do this. We don't survive. Did you see the King of Jordan's face as he sat next to Trump? I mean, the man was having a heart attack right there. He was having a stroke because Trump was saying things that are politically impossible. I knew that Trump wasn't going to implement this plan the moment he spoke, because when he speaks of a situation that requires 100,000 American troops on the ground in Gaza, when we don't have 100,000 troops to put on the ground in Gaza, especially when we're trying to deal with the situation in Europe, repivot to Pacific and talk about the American homeland, the potential of putting American troops into Panama. I know how many troops are in the American military, and we don't have 100,000 to put into Gaza. So this was never going to happen. Why did he do it then? To put something so frickin' outlandish out there that the Zionists couldn't disagree. Miriam Adelson's going, I think it sounds good. Does it sound good to you? He said, get rid of all the Palestinians, right? That sounds pretty good to me. $100 million well spent. Good on me. Good job, me. And Netanyahu's going, remember the white knuckles that he was holding the podium with when he's listening? Netanyahu's going, but he didn't say Israel. We're not involved in this. He said when they do this, the world is coming in, not Israel. There's a problem here. Danger, Will Rogers, danger. And there is a problem. After Trump finished with Abdullah, making Abdullah have a stroke in place in the White House, he was supposed to turn his attention on to Sisi. Sisi immediately said, I'm done. Nope, no phone call, called up the Saudis and said, okay, we're going to do something Egypt has never, ever done before. We're going to go into Gaza. We're going to pay for it. We're going to rebuild. The Palestinians who stay there, Saudi Arabia is going to fund it. But no, Mr. President, here's our counter offer. And Marco Rubio immediately went, yep, see, now we have a counter offer out there. Now we got something to talk about. Now you know what Trump was telling. He was never going to put American troops on the ground to forcibly displace the Palestinians. He was changing the paradigm. He eliminated the ability to go backwards to UNRWA open-air concentration camp, and he took Israel out of the picture. We now have a situation where Gaza will be a Palestinian homeland without an Israeli occupation. That's fundamentally different than anything that's ever happened. Now, has he followed through? He has to be careful because he has Zionists, so he has to say all the right Zionist things. You guys want bombs? Here's some bombs. But the Israelis are like, that means you're going to bomb Iran. He's going, nope, we ain't bombing Iran. We're having negotiations with Iran. Now, the negotiations always start with stupid talk. So you have Marco Rubio, Iran's the number one threat, The Iranian people don't like the regime. Don't listen to Rubio. Listen to Trump. I want normalized relations with Iran. I have no problem with the Iranian government. If we can get this nuclear situation under control, we can lift sanctions and move on with them. That's the strategic direction that Trump's going into. So there's not talk about war with Iran. That's not going to happen. Donald Trump ran on a peace platform. A peace platform means just that, peace, no major wars, pulling American troops out of Syria. That's what he said he's going to do. And so I think what we have here is Donald Trump doing the impossible, having surrounded himself with the most vehemently Zionistic people in the world. Just again, Joe, I ask you the question this. Donald Trump put that proposal out there. What did Elise Stefanik, the Zionist pro-Israeli U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, have to say about this? Not a damn thing.
I was going to say, I didn't hear anything. Yeah.
What did Michael Huckabee, the Christian born-again Zionist who wants a greater Israel and all, have to say about this? Not a damn thing. What did any of the Zionists that Trump brought in have to say? Not a damn thing. Why? Because like Zelensky, they don't matter. They have been nullified. Trump has come in and created a scenario where he has taken the Zionists out of the picture. He is now in direct negotiations without Israeli participation with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Jordan on how to rebuild Gaza and keep the Palestinians in Gaza. Nobody gives him any credit for this. This man, again, I have to go into Dennis Hopper mode. He's crazy, man. He's thinking that his brain's working in ways that nobody's brains ever worked before. He has a plan, and the plan is being implemented in front of us, but it's so outrageous, nobody wants to believe it. Nobody wants to believe it, but I just laid out the facts. If you can contradict any of the facts I just laid out there, then I'll say maybe I'm wrong. But every fact I said is 100% correct. There's a counter proposal now on the table. This was a New York State real estate negotiation where Donald Trump came in with the most ridiculous proposal ever. And all the people that couldn't handle it left. If you said no, you opted out. The only way you got to come in is when you sit at the table and go, here's a counter proposal. Now Donald Trump shuts the door and goes, okay, now we're talking. Now we're talking. You see, because Trump wants to solve this problem, not perpetuate this problem. Trump wants to end the fighting, not give an excuse to continue the fighting. Look at what the ceasefire. You know, it expired yesterday, right? Supposed to expire. Because those damn Hamas people, they weren't going to release the hostages. Trump, we're going to unleash the hound dogs. Israel's going to bomb. We're going to blow it up. And at the last second, Hamas went, hostages are released. And Trump said, okay. Did the ceasefire, is Israel bombing Gaza right now? Has Israel moved its army back into Gaza right now? The answer is no. Why? Trump won't let them. He'll pretend that he'll let them. He's playing political games. Trump is in a negotiation with the Arabs to solve the Gaza problem. He's not going to let the Israelis disrupt that. You remember he sent Wyckoff or whatever the guy's name in to talk to Netanyahu. It was the shortest conversation ever. Sit down, shut up, and listen. I'm telling you what it's going to be. And Netanyahu went, well, I don't understand what's happening here. This is Donald Trump who played clips of Jeffrey Sachs on his social media, calling Netanyahu the biggest prick in the world, a criminal, a man who let America down. That's Donald Trump's true opinion of him. He hates Benjamin Netanyahu. He's not going to sit here and do a favor for Benjamin Netanyahu. He despises the man. He wants to bring an end to the conflict. He wants to bring an end to the war in the Middle East because he has a strategic vision that's focused on reinforcing the American homeland and confronting China in the Pacific. And a major war in the Middle East screws that up big time. So again, the proof is in the pudding, but like I said the day he put that out there, I went on record and said this isn't a real deal. He's looking for the counter proposal. And everybody hated. I mean, the Palestinians went crazy, the pro-Palestinians went crazy, called me a traitor, I betrayed the cause, I'm this, that, and the other side. I said, no, I understand what's going on here. Donald Trump is playing a negotiation. And sure enough, the Egyptians folded, Saudi Arabia committed, and now there's a meeting in the Middle East with the Americans. Marco Rubio said it best. He's the Secretary of State, so I sort of defer to him. He said that it was a counter proposal, and now we are prepared to engage on that. That's what I think's going on here. I know that this breaks up the narrative of all the people that hate Donald Trump because he surrounded himself with Zionists. But I think he surrounded himself with Zionists on purpose because the Godfather taught me this. Keep your friends close, but keep your enemies closer. And the Zionists are not friends of Donald Trump. They paid him $100 million to get elected. That's their problem. Donald Trump right now is not beholden to anybody. And he is going to bring peace to the Middle East if that's the last thing he does.
Ray, I thought for a minute he was going to have the last word, but go ahead, please.
You're muted, Ray.
Ray, I think you hit the mute button for some reason. Yeah. Okay, it's the last word. Oh, no, he unmuted. Okay. Oh,
Now, my things ran out of juice, so can you hear me now?
yes, we
Yeah.
can.
Okay. Well, I think what Scott has been saying is very, very hopeful, but I think that Netanyahu is cleverer than Trump. I don't care how much Trump may hate Netanyahu. I think Netanyahu is playing Trump. We're talking about 2 million people. We're talking about a possible solution that's not really practicable because we haven't said a word about Hamas. Now, Scott, you were the first one to tell me that Hamas was really, really powerful and better than Israeli army. Are they still there? Yeah, they're still there. Will they still have something to do with this? Yeah, they will. So my notion is that I fully expect phase three to start with an end to the ceasefire and Netanyahu thumbing his nose at the American president, just like all his predecessors and he himself have done. So I'll go on record saying that, and I hope that you're right and I'm wrong in this situation.
Let me just add about Hamas. Joe, when you talk about the things that Rubio and Lavrov were going to talk about in Riyadh, one of the things they were going to discuss is Gaza. What does Russia bring to Gaza that would be relevant in this regard? It was the Russians who recognized that the United States and Israel would never be able to deal with Hamas as the political authority in Gaza. It's a political impossibility. It's the Russians that recognize the United States and Israel would never be able to deal with Hamas as the military power in there. So it was the Russians that brought 14 Palestinian factions together in Moscow to come up with a political singularity that would incorporate Hamas and recognizes Hamas's reality, but call it something different. This is a tactic the United States has used in the past, most recently in Syria, where we renamed the YPG, which was really the PKK, a terrorist organization that we couldn't deal with by law. So we called them the Syrian Democratic Forces, and simply by renaming them, suddenly we can deal with them. And the Russians have been working very closely with the Chinese on this. In fact, this summer, Russia handed over that portfolio, and China brought the 14 Palestinian factions into Beijing, where they solidified a deal. So I think that's how we solve the Hamas problem. And I think that's one of the things that Trump is going to be working with the Russians is that as we rebuild this Gaza thing, the political institution that works hand in hand with this new group will not be called Hamas. It will be called the people that are Hamas and aren't Hamas. Um, and this is, I think Netanyahu has been outclassed, outfoxed, outsmarted. He's a sick man. He has huge problems at home politically. He's a desperate man, and he is not going to. Donald Trump owns him, owns him. He's in his mind. He's playing him like a child. It's not the other way around. Netanyahu carries no cards because Trump understands the power that the United States has, and Netanyahu understands that too. Trump is committing political capital to resolving the Gaza thing. And if Netanyahu messes with this, he does so at the risk of having his entire life destroyed. And when I mean destroyed, I mean being arrested by the Israeli authorities and put in jail for the rest of his life for corruption. Trump can make that happen. The United States has that level of influence in Israel today. I'm not normally a fan of the CIA, but the CIA has connectivity inside Israel, very strong connectivity. And if the President of the United States says that Netanyahu must go, Netanyahu will go. That's how quick it'll happen, too. And Netanyahu knows this. So I think the deal, like I said, the deal has been made on many levels. The Russians didn't go through the motions of inviting 14 Palestinian factions to Moscow to begin a discussion that was finalized in Beijing for nothing. And I think Trump, again, has been talking to people who are knowledgeable of the Russians and has been well briefed on what the Russians can bring to the table on this. I think we're going to find when Bob Woodward writes his tell-all book expose of whatever the hell's going on, that there is a group of people that have been working, I'm going to speculate, with Donald Trump Jr., who has brought in some extremely knowledgeable people who have been doing behind the scenes advice to Donald Trump: a team B, outside of the normal chains, free of the influence of the deep state. And because Trump is doing things that can only happen if he is, it only makes sense if he's briefed, if he's well briefed on the complexities. And again, you solve the Hamas problem, the Russians have the solution. The Russians have already solved it. The Biden administration would never buy into it because the Biden administration would never tell the Israelis no. I think Trump's going to say, I am not going to let these Arabs come in and promise to rebuild Gaza and throw that opportunity away because you won't accept the political compromises that have to occur. And I just think you're going to see there will be a new governmental entity coming into power in Gaza that'll incorporate elements of Hamas, but they won't be called Hamas anymore. They'll be called the Palestinian Democratic, Party of Freedom and Love and Liberty. And I just think I don't give the Israelis. They are a defeated nation. This is not a victorious nation. This is not a nation that has come at their army lost, their economy lost, their politicians lost. Netanyahu's coalition almost collapsed. He's hanging by a thread. The courts are coming after him, and the CIA is experts at exploiting this. You know that, Ray. This is what the CIA lives to do. Those operators, not you analytical types. You guys were good boys, but the operators are evil, and they sit there and they build dossiers on every weakness so that the president of the United States can control the situation. And he's not going to let Netanyahu undermine his strategic vision. Donald Trump wants to win not one, but 4 Nobel Peace Prizes, and so simultaneously. And so he's not going to let Netanyahu screw that up. That's just my take.
So, Scott, we know from Syria that you could change the name of Al Qaeda to IHT, and they're still Al Qaeda. The Egyptians, if in your scenario, the Egyptians will take again control of Egypt as they did until from 48 to 67, at least administer it. The Hamas is basically Muslim Brotherhood
Yep.
branch. Now Egypt in Cairo has a lot of problems with the Muslim Brotherhood, as we know. So how are they going to? How will the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, whatever you want to call them, the Peace and Love Party, going to deal with Egyptians coming back in to administer Gaza?
I don't think the Egyptians will be administering Gaza. I think the Egyptians will be working with an Arab coalition. They'll be like the engineering subcontractors for the big project. Gaza will be administered by this new Palestinian entity.
They're going to govern it, and Israel will have to say okay to that.
Israel doesn't have a vote anymore. They're not at the table, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Israel's not at the table.
They'll be at Zelensky's table and Ursula's table. The reject
They're
table.
sitting at the reject table. You know when you have the big party and all the adults come together and they bring their subversive teenagers that weren't supposed to be here, and they end up in the far room over the card table where they get some chips and soda. That's Ursula, Zelensky, and Netanyahu. They're there. Trump has set a different table.
All right. I thank you guys enormously for 3 hours of incredible discussion, and particularly the last part here. I thank Patrick, who unfortunately had to leave us, and Elizabeth, who's stuck with us all this time, Cathy back in Sydney. We were on the right-hand side of X as one of the featured live streams to follow, which is one of the reasons why I gave that long spiel about why we say it was a provoked invasion by Russia of Ukraine. So thanks again, Ray, Scott, Elizabeth, for CN Live. This is Joe Lauria saying goodbye, and we'll see you again very soon.